Oh my goodness. Oh, he's an M&M. Oh, I missed out. I should have dressed up. Oh, you are looking good, Thomas Jockin. You are living the dream. It's good to see you, Andrew and Tyler Murphy. So what part did you go to? Did you go to a Hershey's factory or something, Thomas Jockin?
A little that's not in Pennsylvania. That's a little too far for you guys.
I was about to say that was a commitment. Go all the way up there for Halloween. That would be amazing.
It's the Halloween theme edition, so I figured why not spirit? Yeah, by the way, the you don't realize how much the compression of five fingers, 5 digits to 4 digits, is quite significant impairment for basically doing anything with your cell phone or screens, let alone writing. So I have to go with not with the five with my 5 digit for writing and gloves for this one.
I just love the twist is Jockin's gonna pull the glove off and it's just skeleton. Like that's all it's gonna be. It's like dun 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 and then cut. Net 20 123 Halloween edition. It will just breathe there. Well, I hope you're doing a cup so well though. It's like you've done this for years. You are all over it, Mr. Jockin.
It's all about fluency. It's all about
Yeah. That's perfect. It was legible. So, that fluency. So it's right in the spirit of things. And Tyler, good to see you. I certainly enjoyed your presentation at Theory Underground on the dusting. I thought that was beautiful and very well presented, sir. And I salute you as
Oh,
well. You drove like 9 hours or something, right?
I did. I could only be there for Wednesday night and Thursday morning, and then I had to unfortunately come back for a funeral um, on set for Saturday. But it was an awesome event, and I was just thinking about how I'm rereading Dave's book Time Energy,
Yeah.
and it's amazing how just going there in person and meeting people, how it's like it can almost unlock um, a deeper understanding of somebody's work. Um, but also just thinking about how with time energy, like I go through these swings of having relative time energy is maybe what I would call it. But then I was thinking tonight, like, oh, maybe I won't tune into. I just saw your email, and I was like, oh, am I up for joining? And then I thought, well, part of time energy is you have to put yourself in the community that in these places where other people have at least some relative time energy as well to even have it at all. So
Yeah.
I was like, okay, all right, I'll tune in. But curious to hear your thoughts on the conference and any reflections that you have.
Oh yeah. Well, I think that question of time energy is a very real one. I think one of the reasons too, if we think of what's going on here again, as we've said many times, is a social coordination mechanism that deals with things like the introduction problem, that deals with what in the past was social coordination limited by geography and different things, instead of merely content creation, then I think it becomes very clear why this technology can be different. Like, because when you look at attentionalism in the internet, you go, oh, people are just making content, trying to make platforms, and it's just cloud capital, as people will talk about. And oh, we're just trying to be celebrity. Sure, that's part, but it's also hard to imagine any technology that cannot be used as a bad form of it. Like, is there any? Like, I was reading oh, I feel so dumb. The German guy who invented the rockets, he's like a really big deal. I was reading a biography on him that my friend Paul gave me, and his whole dream was basically going to Mars. And it turned out all of his ideas were given toward rockets to blow stuff up in the war, right? And so it's interesting. Like, what's his name? He's fascinating with rocket technology and different things. I'll remember at about 2 in the morning. And Mr. Rivera, good to see you. So every technology can be used in an explorative fashion. I mean, also you could argue every concept can be used in a bad way, right? One can use God to control people, one can use God to open up to the divine, one can use dialectics to try to avoid a decision, and one can use dialectics to say we ultimately have to make a decision. One can use beauty to get out of thinking, and one can use thinking to get out of beauty. It seems everything has the potential disordering or corruption. And again, like when you think of this as a social coordination mechanism, it's like I look like, we ran Eunoia for many years and many different communities, TomTom. And one of the things that always made it hard to keep those communities going is precisely lacking something to fill in the space between events. Or if people moved away, or they had kids, or they get a different job, how could they stay in contact if they couldn't use the open mic, make the open mic anymore, right? If they couldn't make the Sunday 5 p.m. because they had a change in the schedule. There was no way to make up for, in coordination and gathering, those things that would come up. So every community, it was very hard to keep them going. Unless you had a number of people who, say, maybe didn't have kids, or they didn't have the same work obligations, or maybe had the ability to gather. And of course, there are instances around the world where this has occurred. I'm not saying it can't occur. It's a question of the efficiency or likelihood, right? For most of history, the likelihood that you would be able to keep social units going through time over a long period of time was quite rare and quite difficult, because you didn't have a mechanism to kind of make up for the space between, right? Or make up for the fact that, how do you know the people you don't know, right? Like, how would you do that? Like, for most of history, you just happen to bump into them at the market, or happen to bump into them at college or something. Now you can go on YouTube and overcome the introduction problem, as we've talked about before. And there it is. It's a way of meeting people that you've never seen before. So again, I think if we think of all of this as the social coordination mechanism, it's a really big deal. And it makes possible for communities that also have a kind of rhizomatic structure to them, but not that Deleuze talks about, but doesn't lead to the cheap Deleuze that just ends up in madness. Meaning you can have an event pop up in Boise, then, no live event, but then 2 months later pop up in Canada, then 2 months, and then in Europe, and then you have another voice craft in Australia, and you have these kind of pop-ups that look unconnected, but the social coordination mechanism kept the Silk Road going between them online, between those events, that could then work with time, energy restrictions, capital restrictions, and things like that. So I think we are seeing, again, ways of social coordination that, I also actually do think I think we're going to be surprised how many people are interested in philosophical ideas, or learning the arts, or going into the humanities. They simply have felt they've had to choose between a practical job and doing this. And they felt that if they went into like literature at college, they wouldn't get a good job. And that's how they have felt. Well, now there really are ways to actually get that additional education beyond just the classroom that opens up. Tyler, please.
Yeah, well, one of the things that has been on my mind, and going to the TUCon, so in the art world, for years, any artist that I know that is really trying to become a professional painter, for the most part, at least within my world, the idea of going to university is really not that tempting to most people, because you realize that, well, I could just go take a workshop from somebody, maybe a 3 to 5 day workshop, do that a couple times a year. Maybe I have put 2 to 3 grand into that, but I'll learn way more in that amount of time and not go hundreds of thousands of dollars into debt. And I guess that was I was realizing that same kind of thing is now happening online in all these different places. And I just hadn't quite connected that until I was there at TUCon, that, oh, this is really similar to how it's felt being a part of the art workshop world that I'm a part of.
Oh no, I feel the exact same way, like with Eunoia and the artists and the visual, like where there is that kind of, but here's the issue, like many people in the art world, you still have well, how do I get into a community or network or meet other people that could connect with things? It almost forces you to feel like, oh, I actually do have to get into debt, but then you're just getting into debt basically for the networking, right? And that's one of the ways. Michelle brought me this hat, so now it is the Halloween. I'll be Oliver Twist. So great. It is the Halloween edition now. Perfect. I feel in character. All right. I'll be Oliver Twist. This is great. Thank you, Michelle. All right. We're set. So like that, I mean, many times you're paying for the social network, right? And that has always been a real tension, or why you said, well, I need to move to New York because I need to be around people, right? Well, one, that can cause a brain drain, which I think is actually extremely politically consequential, because a lot of these small towns that feel left behind is because all of their star talent moved away. Like they moved to the city, right? Which has like literally social yeah, there we go. Or Luigi. Oh, I need, you're exactly right, Mr. Parsons. I need like the plumber. I need the plumber thing. I need the plunger. I think like the lack of a social coordination mechanism has been of major political consequence because it's contributed to the brain drain. It's contributed to everyone going to the cities, which then also, if there's something about success in school that leads to people going to cities to get jobs, well, since people's ideologies are shaped by their environment, not just their ideas and who they're around, that means there's a tilting of people who do intellectual work in the liberal direction. And that's where then there can be an anti-intellectualism that develops onto conservatism, because it feels like intellectualism is always just representing, say, more of the liberal side. And that's why you've had this explosion of now conservative intellectualism, Daily Wire, and it's all been online. And you see, but the problem is, it's yet that's still in the place of rebellion or retribution or getting back at those liberal intellectuals from the college, right? It hasn't moved to the dialectical place yet, where it's like literally like what you see as an emphasis, like with Dave, and I think we see it here in Cadell and all of us, is the inadequacy of thinking today simply in a conservative ideology or simply in a liberal ideology, right? There's this kind of sense of you need that tragedy in your thinking to operate. So I think the brain drain that has also been a result. Mr. Luber, it's the Halloween edition. I'm Oliver Twist. Mr. Jockin is an M&M. So it all works out. So I'm going to be Oliver Twist. So it's going to be great. Actually, Mr. Parsons said I'm probably Luigi, and that's true. I just don't have a plunger, but I could get one. I just need an L and a frickin' plunger, and then it will be set. So the social coordination problem has led, in my opinion, then I'll give it to whoever wants to speak. And then you asked about the conference. I thought the conference was indeed a beautiful example of basically humanities networking, like you've seen in the art world, that is not beholden to high payments or geographical restrictions for the possibility of network effects or different things. And Michael, I'm Luigi because it's Halloween, or Oliver Twist. You decide. So because Mr. Jockin's an M&M. So it's great. The Theory Underground conference, Mr. Luber. We were talking about that as I sit on the porch and look at the stars on this fine autumn evening. We have seen twice now Elon Musk's like satellites explode open and go across the sky. It's quite beautiful, except when you don't know what it is, because then you assume that the missiles have been launched. The first night we saw it and it all scattered. We're like, well, it was a really good evening. We had some good pie, and now we're gonna die. But it was actually just satellites, so it was fine. It wasn't a big deal. So I think the lack of that social coordination contributes directly to anti-intellectualism and to intellectualism being formed by a certain geography, a certain way of life. And since the true isn't the rational, the experiences that people absorb influences how they rationalize and how they reason. And so that really creates an anti-intellectual world. So another reason why I think the social coordination system that we're seeing today is a really big deal, because it can actually help work against that brain drain, as people will talk about, from small communities, that contributes to a feeling of communities being resentful because a lot of their talent is being pulled out, and then also a lot of the intellectualism reflecting urban or certain environmental values that can be very problematic. I mean, basically, a thing that I think came out in the Theory Underground conference, as also we've talked about so much, is basic, and then I'll give it to Mr. Luber, who will comment much on how I do need a mustache to be Luigi, and right now I'm just a poser and a sad wannabe on a porch because I don't have the mustache. I'm really sorry about that. It's just basically the idea that if you're going to talk about, fixing things or different economic, socioeconomic possibilities, then you need to change ways how people think. But that's been difficult to do without social coordination. But now, because you have places where people can meet and talk like this, I think that has changed. And I was also thinking, because Mr. Rivera has been doing a lovely series. I saw Jockin and in Luber's conversation. I see he also had one with Aspasia on God. Like, I can't imagine that kind of conversation occurring at a university. Because here's the other thing. It would have to be in a classroom of 30 people, right? But you really do want one by one by one by one recorded, everybody see, because that's so important. Like, I really don't know if the interfaith or religious or theological conversation could really flourish without this kind of technology. Because I think it overly gets supplanted by a program, like a conference structure or a classroom structure, that takes away the personal narrative. Because I think, like, not to bring up, but, Cadell was writing on that, and I did watch it, that interesting discussion between Peterson and Dawkins, which it was quite obvious there was a lot of talking past one another. But, it's still very important. I'm not trying to make fun of it, but I think a key element of that conversation is basically without the ability to bring in the personal and bring it together with the intellectual and bring it in with the full person. That discussion is always going to hit a kind of wall. And for me, that's where that kind of conversation that is figuring out how to move beyond those impossible obstacles requires actually this kind of technology to do. Actually, I like inter-philosophical and inter-theological, inter-ideological discussions. Seems like it needs the intimate one-on-one, but that is then available to the public to see afterwards. Because if you think about it, that's a pretty wild difference. Like for most of history, it was 30 people in the room listening to two people talk, or it was one-on-one and no one else saw it. Now you can have a one-on-one that can be publicly seen and different things. I do think that's a significant difference. So I think the social coordination is very, very important. I'll give it to Mr. Luber, Mr. Jockin, and then Michael here. And Mr. Ebert, it is good to see you. I'm looking forward to your discussion with Rut that I saw come up. So it is good to see you, but let me give it to Luber here. Mr. Luber, and it is the Halloween edition, everyone. I have my Oliver Twist hat, and Mr. Jockin is Eminem. So Luber's going to come back wearing Heidi on his head because he is the dog whisperer. Mr. Luber.
You're funny as shit, Daniel. I mean Oliver. I didn't mean to say Daniel. It's Oliver. That was. I think that's a fantastic point. You know, to piggyback off of the sentiment that you're touching on there. I think you can have that one-on-one discussion and everyone see it. Where like you just said, like in the past, like no one would be able to really see it unless like you record it. And like record it like on paper, like a dialogue, and then you would have to read it. But anyway, I think what the technology also does is that it creates a gap where it actually allows people to be vulnerable in intellectual context. And I think like thinking back to my college years and just like my time in academia world with philosophy, in the classroom it was never personal, but like I would go to office hours, I would grab dinner with like my professor I'm really close with, and it would get really personal. And most of the time that the philosophy really hit me was during these personal times. Like not actually, like yes, I learned shit in the classroom, I learned a lot in the classroom, but it didn't really like hit me in a way where I'm inspired to think on my own. Like I think that's like the key, where the technology creates like a gap where you can feel comfortable saying things about your life to people that like but there isn't this like expectation of seeing them every day in person. And there's a certain like, I think what's happened is, like you're saying, for most of history, everything was in person and you had this like immediacy expectation in person. And I think a certain neuroticism has occurred through the repetition of that. And I think technology, it's possible that it created the gap, like in terms of literal space between people, to help that neuroses almost breathe. Yes, of course, the ironic move is possible where it only gets worse, because the gap actually makes you like lament and fester over the times that you will have to meet in person, and it makes it even worse potentially. But on the bright side, I think there's a bright side to it as well, which is what I'm trying to point out, which is the ability to be vulnerable and actually get to the truth in conversation, because you're not thinking as rationally, you're thinking more emotionally in these type of situations. Like when, oh, let me talk about my opinion about God to Javier. Like people can judge me, and like there's stakes involved in terms of like how I'm, seen by the world. And that provides this emotional like underpinning in the conversation, while at the same time there's like a comfort in me actually being able to do it, knowing that, because there is this distance between Javier and I when we are talking. I kind of want to think more on what I'm saying. I definitely took a liking to what you were just saying, though. I just wanted to squeeze that in.
No, I think gap is a great language. Well, and then I'll give it to Mr. Jockin and then Michael here. And if anyone does have any more Halloween costumes you want to put on, I wouldn't say you must run and get it, but if you feel the moment so compels you to go spend $100 on some bunny ears at a local shop and put them on, please go right ahead. But that language of gap, I think, is very powerful. Well, one of the issues is, I think, like, how do you hear, say, the way that two conservatives would talk with one another in private, publicly, but in a manner that is still authentic to them, right? Because everyone talks differently in different environments and settings, right? Now, there's something good about that, but then there's also something bad about that, because then you don't have a sense of how people are really feeling, how people are really doing, and what really could, bam, we got another. Nice, Michael. Nice. So, and as a result, then people are shocked when it turns out the public is more, angry or extreme, or have been looking for a permissionary to be angry all the time or something, right? Like, there's also something where, if someone really thinks that David Hume sucks and they're really, really smart, and there's an advantage for, obviously I do a lot of work on David Hume. There's a massive advantage between hearing two really smart people talk about why David Hume sucks that they would probably never say to me directly, knowing that I like David Hume, but I also would benefit from hearing them, but then also probably wouldn't actually want to be in the room with them, because then I would feel like I had to defend it or I'd have to respond, right? Like, that dynamic of being able to hear two really smart people who hate David Hume genuinely talk about, we got 4. Michelle's on it. Genuinely hear two people who hate David Hume but are smart, like, talk freely with one another, and then me be able to listen to it without being in the room. I'm getting the private, unfiltered opinion of Hume that I probably need to hear to realize, that's a good point. That essay did suck in Hume. I better go check it. They're right about that. I would have never gotten that without hearing that unfiltered private conversation, but yet I wouldn't be really beneficial for me to be in the room with that conversation. And that probably just even being there, even if I didn't say anything, would throw everything off. Yeah, that's probably a good reason. I think Mr. Luber, if that was true, well, he did go to the bar quite a bit with Mr. Smith. I think they have quite crazy food in Scotland with that kind of place. So anyway, that exposure to an unfiltered conversation to you, because then it also allows the thing we talk about all the time is the unveiling with the UN in parentheses with Beatrice, the gradual unveiling. That's also something the gap affords that I actually think is the sweet spot in, dare I say, intellectual, political, economic thought that you need, which is where somebody is not like, this is how most of history people have done it. If they know you're a liberal and they're a conservative, they tend to be really aggressive, like go in hard and attack you, which isn't very productive, or they agree with everything you say when they really don't agree with you, but they don't want to say it because they want to avoid conflict, right? So there's two ditches here. You have this kind of winning the debate, gunning you down, couldn't care, thing that we see all the time. But then you also have the overly agreeing kind of thing. Mr. Barr, we got 5. Oh, this is Halloween. We're going to start passing out candy. It's going to be great. Kids are going to come by. I've got the porch lights on. That does mean it's time for candy. So, they're going to all stop by with their little buckets. I am Luigi. Oh, it's good. Oh, Michelle's on it. So I got the L. All right. I am Luigi. Thank you, Michelle. It is time. All right. So, yep. Michelle, you are a saint. Oh my gosh. It's time. We have done it. Wow. I actually really do look like Luigi. I really am taken by this. Okay. Yes. This is, oh yeah. Mamma mia, pizzeria. Mamma papa pizzeria. Oh, there's gloves as well. Just give me one so I can be Luigi Jackson. Okay, that's so good. All right, we're set. All right, everyone. So I'll just hold this. This is good. So anyway, I think it's just really important to have that ability now to have the experience of people who in private are talking that you can benefit from to think about. Because for most of history, we haven't been able to navigate that balance between the not being confrontational enough or overly confrontational. And one of the reasons why, there we go, is because it's very hard when you're in the presence of the other and you disagree, maybe even strongly, to not compensate that with overly aggressive emotion, right? Like, some people have that skill, but it's very rare and very difficult, but the gap can actually afford that, I think. But let me give it to Mr. Jockin and then Michael. And so Mr. Jockin, please.
Well, can we just take a moment to give a meta-analysis of one of the one of the values of education is these non-content kind of senses of belonging of us getting in costumes is just hilarious because it's like, why not? Because we're in this group together. So it's just and then notice this kind of like acceleration of the idea. So once I initiated it, then people started running in and started piling in to accelerate the idea. This is funny because this has absolutely no legibility in terms of content objectives, right? If we were talking about a classroom with classroom objectives and lesson plans, this idea of, hey, we're just going to dress up for Halloween and just have a hilarious time accelerating on this isn't going to really happen or wouldn't be measured. So I just want to give a note of just recognition of that. Yes, I agree. This is definitely the vibe I definitely had when I decided to come in my costume. I was like, why not? And there you go. Okay. So with that said, Daniel, I think this is a couple. Obviously, I do teach, so I think this is a very relevant point for me to kind of come in with some points. One is the idea of the politely enforced gentleness or civility of agreement, meaning no, we have a certain kind of, I want to call like a bourgeois kind of attitude of like, no, the conflict needs to be a certain mediated banner of range of disagreement. If we exceed this boundary by whichever parameter, we're shutting down the conversation. You're not playing the game properly. One can make we can make many different arguments about where that's coming from, but I do think actually, and then tying into what I was going to say, I mean, the degree of high trust exchange Javier had to have those conversations with all of us about on God. It's because it wasn't like, here's the thing, it's important. It wasn't like Javier was just like some random dude on the internet, just came up in our email and again, hey, you want to talk about God? I don't think any of us were going to jump in the way we did. So I think that's the first part, just a key note of like high trust exchange communications. I think that's quite important of a detail that just the mechanism of the classroom isn't going to do. And as Luber said, basically most of those exchanges occurred in the one-on-one modality, not the room of 30 modality. That scale change does change the dynamics of what you can do. Now you can do some cool things with larger groups. I'm not saying that because, like, for example, this idea of like, there's a difference between, for example, if I was on a Zoom call with Daniel and I came in my costume and he came in his costume, that's cool. But now we got a bunch of people who come in and trying to pile in too. There's something fun about the aggregational effect. So I'm not here to dismiss that, but I think it's actually, and related to the arts, I do think it's very true. I mean, I'll be honest with you guys. Yeah, the value proposition is really two things from art school, especially. Like I went to a private art school, went to Parsons, and I taught at state schools, the elite private schools. I've done the whole range of caboodle. What you're generally paying for is access to relationships. That's absolutely the case. In fact, they seek the unspoken agreement is you're in that classroom to impress the professors, the instructors, because they're actually working professionals for the most part. That's a key distinction. Usually the high-level professionals, they're not actual faculty. They're working professionals for the most part, but usually high-tier ones, like not just Joe Blow, random person, but high-level professionals. Doing well in those environments is basically a job interview, because what happens is you're going to be picked for an intern. You're going to get picked for the internship. You're getting picked for the junior position, etc., and you're going to get mentored. So it's basically a review it's an application. It's a secret job application process to get the apprenticeship. That's what it's all about. Actually, that's been, if anything, I would argue that's been accelerated now because of things like AI. What's happened is basically all the very rote, boring, the repetitive projects that the junior designers used to have to do. Guess what? AI does that so much better. So guess what's happened now? We've picked the ladder now, the entry level positions where youth and energy and kind of raw, energetic movement of the youth is now no longer the value exchange has now been removed, because now a more senior designer can just let AI handle most of the work and then they just clean it up afterwards. So we've seen basically a compression at the bottom level of the education mentorship ladder in design. It's actually a big crisis. There's actually been a conversation in the professional field in the design that where like I've seen articles talking about it, where we no longer have the mentor educator pipeline or trajectory we used to have. Partly because the cultural incentives have changed, where in the past, it made sense to train the mentee, the junior designers, because there was both a cultural and economic justification, in the sense that because we have all this rote, monotonous, boring work that the senior designers just do not, or get paid too much to go do and don't want to do it, they take on the junior designer to train them in exchange for that junior designer at a lower general pay, doing the routine work that is not a justifiable for a high price point person to do. But that economic incentive has been inverted now. So now we got a problem based on that fact. And that's even within the education system. If you're outside that system, you're literally invisible. I've heard so many stories of people applying for positions where there's like 300 applicants for like junior to entry middle level design positions. So thus you're getting swarmed out. How's your portfolio going to stand out to that question? There's legibility problems with all this. Okay, well, I'm just pointing out, like, this is what the kind of the purpose of the educational platform was meant to do. It's like basically not just accreditation, it's also the pipeline of mentorship. It's a job application process to get the mentorship. Those are the two. So, but I'm already pointing out that even that is under stress. That's under significant stress, especially at the lower levels. Like if you go to Parsons, you go to an elite art school, less the case. But I think at the state college level and below, that equation is starting to wrap. And also because most of them are professors. They're usually educators. They're not designers for the most part. So they can't give you that. They cannot train you. They can't put you in as a mentor. But I just want to point out, like, so when I'm pointing out, there's a tension about the mentor to education pipeline system in design. And especially when we see like the raw content's online, guys, like 90% of the information is online. It's there. So I can only say really pragmatically, the value proposition besides the accreditation part and being legible to get access to an MFA or other higher level educational experience, is having a forcing mechanism to make you do assignments. That's what it's for. Basically, instead of you having to use your self-cognitional process to train, to set up a schedule, set up a curriculum, go do the protocols, learn HTML, CSS, JavaScript, learn typography, learn composition, learn art, graphic design history. No, you just follow the protocol. You follow the protocol. There's value in that because, quite frankly, that's a lot of mental brain power that people don't want to deal with. All right. So I'm just saying, like, we're accelerating very clearly the main value proposition. I'm kind of saying stronger and stronger about this over time. In the space like the online space, the imposition of time boxing imperatives to give the ordered out thought processes and to give time imperatives for people to actually commit to something here and now is becoming more and more valuable. And that's the only thing that's really a distinguishing point. I also say this because I went for an interview recently for another position, and they point blank asked me, what's the biggest challenge of education? And I point blank said, oh, because students go, why can't this be online? Why do I have to come to class? So when I told that committee was, we have to think through what are the value propositions of physical spaces that are different from online. And I guess the one I could think of. And that's what I got.
And they were like, shootsies, he's got us. They were like, darn it. I hope, like, and so Asphysia showed up and he's like, oh, okay, they're dressed in costumes. And if anyone walks behind you and they say, who are those people? Is it Halloween? Go, no, it's not Halloween. They just do this every week, and just like go, oh, okay, that's cool. So indifferent. No, I think you said a lot there, and I'll pass it over to Michael here. Well, it's a bunch of things because there's also a way in which I think about just kind of relative. Like one of the things too that I basically did at UVA is I found William Wilson and said, I'll take all of that person's classes, and I really don't care what they teach on, because if that guy is teaching it, that's what I want to take. But that has always been like, one, you get lucky. You encounter the guy who's like that, luck. And then two, arguably that sometimes can hurt your like trajectory to graduation or something, right? Because that person's not going to fill the requirements of what you need, right? But a lot of people will make the point and ask to see if you're wondering, I'm sorry, it's not a real mustache. It's taped on. I'm sorry. I know everyone is shocked. But anyway, and let's see how many times I have to put it back on. But you would follow that part. And a lot of people who did that, who just followed someone who then in essence was a mentor, will basically often have a better education experience than someone who just randomly went from class to class, right? Well, one of the things that is very beneficial between this online space is you can find like a voicecraft, you can find a philosophy, you can find spaces, Jockin, all of these like these places, and then follow it, right? And just keep going with it. So you can replicate what can be some of the best educational experiences, because then you're like, oh, well, if Jockin's teaching on it, then I want to learn about it. It's probably something I need to know about that I didn't know I needed to know about it, right? Oh, if Voicecraft is having a discussion on it, oh, that's probably a discussion I need to be on, right? If that's a key educational coordination mechanism, is finding a person who you go, that person adds value, and they're talking about something I never thought about. Well, that's probably something I need to think about. And that's usually, if people have a good experience in college, that's what happens. You get that guy, you're like, that one, and then whatever they teach on, it turns out that was something you needed to know about that you didn't know you needed to know about. Well, other than that, you're just looking at I want to take this class and this class and this class because I think they're good, and it's all random, and maybe you get lucky, but probably not. It's a much better bet, because all at the end of the day we can do is make probability assessments on this sort of thing, to stick with whatever like Kevin Hart, for example. He was on the I haven't listened to. I love Kevin Hart. He was on the Hermetics talking about Blanche, but he got me into Wallace Stevens. But then he was doing Heidegger. Then he was doing French phenomenology. Then he was doing the history of like the French Revolution. I was like, okay, well, I don't know why Kevin Hart is moving, but if he's doing it, I want to learn about it. And that's just a really effective thing. So likewise, if Theory Underground is inviting these people to the conference, these are probably people I want to listen to. That creates a mentorship effect that often is the best way to do an education system that you can now do, because it simultaneously guides you into fields you didn't know you wanted to go into, because well, this is William Wilson. Well, this is Kevin. I'm going to follow this man. This is Vegan Garoy, and I'm going to go, even if they're teaching on the history of this thing I didn't know about, trees, the history of the Red Wall. Or why is Kevin Hart teaching on the Red Wall children's books? Don't know, but apparently there's something there I didn't know about, right? So that's an important factor. The other thing I was going to say also is basically too, with that kind of coordination going on and that ability to kind of speak through and think through something, like that means that you're learning how to carry conversation. And basically why that's a big deal is because otherwise, especially when we're talking about, and then I'll give it to Michael here, encountering difference, having discussions about different people's view of gods or their different politics or whatever, if you don't have any training whatsoever in the holding to listen, blow up, attack, die, everything, blow it. That in of itself is a skill. Well, it turns out that conversation and being human are skills you need to be mentored in as well. Not just learning how to build buildings or art or photography. It turned out that literally holding yourself as a human being in the presence of the other is something you have to be mentored on as well, right? And it turns out you need to keep doing that your entire life, because just when you think you're good at it, just like when you think you've gone to the gym enough, you stop, and that's when you gain 30 pounds. That's when you lose the ability to have conversations with people where they don't want to get rid of you or something like that. So there's some things like that going on, but let me give it to Michael here. Michael, please.
Yeah, this is all really great. And I will say this is like my pretentious jazz musician outfit that I pulled together in 30 seconds. So it's not as complete and as in depth as some of your other amazing costumes, but I wanted to be a part of the fun. Like so much to pick up on. I feel like what you were saying, Daniel, and you as well, Thomas, about like the kind of intangibles and kind of the invisible merits and benefits of education being really one in skillfully building relationships and connections, and also what you talked about, Daniel, intrinsic motivation, like learning what you are interested in learning about, that is not necessarily directly found in your flowchart or your major path, right? I think that's something that I just graduated from undergrad 2 years ago, and I just started my master's in counseling, and something that I've really observed in the people who get the most out of their undergrad is they didn't all necessarily feel super fulfilled in their major of choice. You know, a lot of them knew it was a field that they wanted to be in, but a lot of, you know, their classes were filled with people who didn't have the same, you know, level of drive and of interest, and a lot of their conversations that they had weren't like terribly engaging and fruitful all the time. But like they figured out how to learn and who to seek out outside of that. And so it was like this like self-directed thing. And like I was just having a conversation with my therapist recently in a session about graduate school, and like, you know, he said for most of his graduate school experience, like he didn't even open the textbooks because they just weren't classes that were interesting to him. But he said it was like one of the most important times of his life because he figured out what he really cared about and was interested in and was proactive in in pursuing that. And so I think college, you know, it's like a lot of people talk about, you know, college like fostering the ability to critically think and think independently. I think is true, but I think like there's like an element of that that I think people miss, which is like part of like thinking for yourself is realizing that you have the capacity within yourself to like separate from the kind of mob, and like that that won't lead to like a life of loneliness, but like there's actually people and spaces and communities like for you. They just might not be like served on the buffet silver platter of college. Like they just might not be like the first thing that you find. You might have to do a little exploration for yourself. And like I look back at like my college experience and like those spaces that I found, like I mean, they were some of the most memorable experiences I've had. And it was actually like the pursuit of it was actually fun. Like it was actually fun to be like, oh, like I'm not going to a party on a Friday night. Like I'm, you know, working on like my mock trial case with my other mock trial nerds. Like and you know, now that I'm in graduate school, like I really feel like I have that quality within myself to be able to discern, like to be able to discern what is truth and what is bullshit, and like also like how to reach out to professors and other people. And yeah, and I think that is kind of like an invisible or less obvious um quality of education, because you know most people, they look at college as the way to get the license, the accreditation, to propel their life forward. And I think looking at it that way disincentivizes people from moving outside of the lane that coordinates you to that position, because like why would you care about taking art history if you were pre-med, like, and that was like all that you wanted out of your life, you know? But like kind of, and I think this is something you've talked about, Daniel, but like, or maybe it was, I don't know, someone else on the TLC, but like the importance of like a broad liberal arts education, I think, regardless of what major or what field you want to go into, is important, because it cultivates this like kind of aesthetic sensibility and appreciation of like the human experience, um, that leads to the exploration of the self and like the ability to differentiate and individuate. You know, like right now in my counseling education, we're talking about like Murray Bowen, the kind of founder of family therapy, and talking about like the differentiation of the self as like a kind of integral part of the therapeutic journey, both as a client and as a therapist. And I think that's something that is like really important in college. And I think a lot of people miss it because I think they conflate differentiation, individuation with like forward movement in career. Like they associate like, oh, I'm becoming independent because I'm moving away from home, and I'm you know going to be a lawyer in 3 years, or I'm going to be a doctor in 3 years, and like you know I'll have the financial independence right? I'm making money, exactly. Whereas like true differentiation is like, and I know Aspasia is a actual therapist. I'm just a student, so I'm sure she has uh lots of great things to say about this as well. But like the true differentiation of self is like much more complex than just, yeah, um, your career. So I think if colleges can, um if the spaces in classrooms can be much more modeled and mirrored after like a space like this or a therapeutic container, regardless of the class you're in, regardless of what you're learning, that it involves the whole self. I think that will, like, I think that will start to kind of change the mechanisms by which people view the, yeah, like what is actually valuable about college. And I think people will then realize the importance of being in person as well, because like there's an embodiment in an interaction with another person in 3D that is, you don't get in online. Although I think in a lot of the online spaces that I'm in, where people are sharing very intimately, what a lot of people do reflect is in the initial encounters with strangers, it does provide a buffer of comfort that allows people to be vulnerable. There's like a safety there, that you're not literally sitting right next to someone pouring out your heart and soul. There's like a little bit of distance. Um, and people can be very beautifully vulnerable in online spaces. Right, yeah, you can shut the screen. You have the like leave button right there. You have the eject. You have the eject. Um, but yeah, but I think there is something about being in person that, like, you know like there's a connection to the environment that I think is important with other people, where it's like, especially if it's a meeting place that you continue to meet at, it's like, oh, there's that tree that we always sit under, or oh, there's the coffee in the break room that we always have, and you have more things that you can bond over. Um, and I think that's what shared spaces really allow. But I feel like I'm kind of going all over the place, so I will yield.
No, I think there's a lot there that's just very important. So watch this. Oh, good, there's no blood. I wasn't sure. Macias, he's all over it. Oh man, it's friggin' Halloween. This is great. Oh my goodness, literally a little kid is going to come up. No, I think there's a lot there. Well, there's a few things. It's interesting how, like, a lot of people who are good at planning events know the point of the events is the conversations that happen in the hallway. There's a lot of people who talk about the best things that happen in college are all of the things that are not why you're at college. And, Mr. Ebert, like I said, he's just had that talk with Mr. Rudd on suboptimal. It's very interesting how the way you make something optimal is by doing the suboptimal thing, funny enough. And that actually kind of brings it out. And so likewise, like if you think that, then you go, oh, okay, whatever space I need to go into, I need to do the thing that is going to be somewhat silly. And actually the silly is what will kind of bring it out. Like the presentation I gave on, and then I'll give it to Michelle Hill with Ivan Illich, is that Ivan Illich basically argues if you would like to extend humanity versus have humanity replaced, you must do something that the people around you will think is silly. There's no other way to extend your humanity. And to not go into, like, because basically some of the reasons for that is because if what you always do is rational, then you're basically guaranteed to be stuck in a multipolar trap, a Nash equilibrium, some sort of game theory dynamic that means you're doing what's rational, so you end up in a suboptimal result, right? A good example, Mr. Jockin brought this up, where there's like 3 million applications for every position. You did what was rational, so now you're stuck sending in applications where it's really like unlikely you'll get the job. It's a suboptimal result, but it's basically the only result you've got, because that's the direction you went in, right? Like this happens too in the literary world. We talk with like different magazines and different agents. It's like if the only if you're overly invested in the creative writing pipeline or the way that the arts are done, you can find yourself in these suboptimal results because you did everything that was rational and you have no network outside of that that's constantly trying to shove you through the same doorway. And then it's like the Three Stooges where they're all stuck in the door at the same time, right? So that doesn't quite work. But if you want to avoid that, then you have to do something that seems silly. But the thing that's actually silly is non-rational, as I would like to put it, that actually breaks you through the Nash equilibria, right? So, like, and yeah, we had at the library on Saturday, we called it Club Clem. We'd all hang out in the library and the Jeff Society people, and I don't know if we did our assignments, but we certainly had a good time on everything. Actually, let me tell you, and Dave talks about this, I never had so much inspiration to do like short stories and novels other than when finals were. If finals were tomorrow, I could get like 50 chapters out. It was unbelievable, just all night. And yeah. So there's something, but that right there is funny because like by precisely the things when you have a limit that are suboptimal, suddenly you can have more motivation to do. That's kind of a funny thing. But like, how do we be smart about the suboptimal? Well, let me put it another way. And then is like something that Walker Percy said that was big for me is he said, if you want to be a doctor, take a creative writing class. And if you want to do creative writing, but go to med school. And the reason he said that is because basically, if you go to creative writing school, then you just write about creative writing. And if you go to become a doctor, then all you know how to do is treat people like a doctor and you lose that human element. So what he was saying is you need to mix the frames, which of course is suboptimal. That seems kind of odd to do, right? But that is precisely what for him, he said, if you don't do that, you get stuck in a framework of activity that you don't even know you're stuck in. And you do what you learn a doctor should do, which is, all within the framework of what everyone thinks, and it can be suboptimal. Or you do that, which is just what a creative writing person does, and you write another novel about somebody writing a novel, right? Because, David Foster Wallace was like, yeah, you need to go like have experiences, like not just write. Because if you just write, then what are you writing about? So there's a kind of irony that happens there, right? But it's kind of like, but my gosh, if I'm not taking a class on creative writing, won't that hurt my ability to write? Oh my gosh, if I'm taking a creative writing class when I'm going to be a doctor, won't that make me a worse doctor? Seems suboptimal. Likewise, there's something suboptimal about doing this kind of work on the internet when you're not in a college and you're not getting paid for it, right? So I was also just thinking, just based on that concept that we've talked about, and that I know, again, that Ebert had the Rut conversation on, is like, you have to do something that's suboptimal. And like, you could argue that this kind of work outside of academia is suboptimal to status, or maybe it's suboptimal to the economics, but that actually unlocks potentials that will keep you from being stuck in the Nash equilibria or one of the 300 people putting in an application, you get stuck in the doorway. It's suboptimal, like Tyler driving 9 hours to be in a live place, but that allows a certain intimacy of interaction that otherwise would not be possible. And yes, there's absolutely something about the lived experience that can't be captured on the digital, but the digital can provide a coordination between the live that otherwise would be lost and possibilities of meaning that couldn't happen. Or again, if somebody is living in California and someone else is in Europe, how do you fill the space? Because it's simply logistically impossible not to have the live events be rarer. How do you keep it alive between that? Or how do you keep like a development occurring between that? Well, the online can do that. Like it can be a continual kind of Silk Road that before was not possible. And let me give it to Michelle here. Michelle, please.
There's Luigi. Basically what I was going to ask really quick to throw it out to the group is, like, it kind of makes me wonder though, if this whole thing happens where, like I was at college, but like I learned more out of the classroom, but I don't know what tuition is these days. Probably something crazy. Probably something like, it was already high when I went to college because I was an out-of-state student. It's probably a lot higher now. I don't know, but can this be justified? Like, do you have to have the thing that has this kind of like formal constraint of, the university itself? Do you need that for this kind of overflow and like the silly things on the side and the Mom, I'm gonna to check on? Yes, I will. I'll come and check on you guys. They have made like this massive pillow fort thing and are hiding and want me to find, be surprised when I find them. I have no idea where they are in this pillow fort. Anyways, the point of the matter is the question is, do we need to have that, like, does that have to happen? Like, because I feel as though some people may feel like, well, I didn't even have, like, because of that barrier of the cost, and people feel like they can justify it less and less, right? Because it's like, well, if it's about the overflow, if it's about the conversations I had at the cafeteria, then why am I paying this tuition to, just for the gatekeeping of that accolade, right? And yes, sometimes you really, like, I'm not saying you shouldn't have training. It's just different means of training. No, it's not. It's, I mean, like Tyler was saying, different forms. Like, let's do a workshop versus just like pay the entire tuition. I think that's becoming much more popular, like a la carte learning of certain subjects with an expert or with a particularly trained person. And so, yeah, I hope I'm asking this in a like very concise way, but do we need those, like, do we have, does it, because if you don't go, you might feel like, well, I missed out on the chance for the overflow. Like, we all know it happens outside of the classroom more than in the classroom, but if you're not even around the structure of the classroom, can you still have that effect? Is it like a completely just a different mindset shift to say, I'm not going to see myself as like missing out, because maybe I do get that dynamic because I work at I don't know, Starbucks, and then but I also like to research, classical music. So like that's your kind of dynamic, but it's different because you're like working. So I was just kind of curious about what you guys think about this, because it's sort of like, to me, systematically and on the big picture, especially with more of like what Jockin was saying, where people are like, why do we even have to like be here? It's like, it's going to take that discernment of like, oh, it's not just about me getting my credits for this degree. It's about the overflow. It's about the excess. It's about the in-between, right? This liminal that occurs in the physical that makes it meaningful, that makes it like, where you really become like hopefully more fully human. But like, if I don't know, it's like you either miss that entirely, even though you go to college, right? You could go and not do the liminal space stuff because you're like just thinking about your tenants. Yes, baby, what do you want to tell me? Are you coming yet? I'm coming soon. So anyways, so yeah, I hope this is making sense, but I'm just kind of wondering, like, what do we just have to say, like, well, yeah, we know it's really expensive, but like that's the only way we get these liminal spaces where we're going between the cafeteria, we have these conversations after the cafeteria? Or is it like, no, like this literally could happen in a different way? We might still have it there at college, but we may also have it in this, I don't know, community centers or something else. But if you make it, if you know that space is the liminal space, like, does it, does it lose out now because it doesn't have the thing that it's for, but it's like you get the side stuff over here. So I hope that question made sense, but I'm curious what y'all think.
It's an excellent question. It makes me think of market force, and then I'll give it to Mr. Jockin. And if you go in and the camera's still on in the fort, and you look in and it's like actually Dexter's laboratory, I was like, yeah, I'm not surprised actually. It's like an entirely like intricate thing, and the real
it's so,
like the real
it's so cute though
Optimus
that
Prime
they
is
want
there.
like I love how that about kids, like they know I know they're there, but it's still so fun for them that I'm surprised that I'm like acting, you know what I mean? Like I just love it. The power of imagination.
That is the giving yourself over to the other fully.
A lot of people.
That is other. Hegel would be proud, overcoming the master-slave dialectic, and, who has the power. It all works out. So, a glimmer of eternity through the transience. So, let us see Dexter's laboratory. But anyway, no, I think the question, it makes you think of market forces. So there's a few things. First, and I'll give it to Jockin and then Tyler here. Basically colleges have had a monopoly on the social coordination of bringing people together of a certain interest and way of thinking that could create network effects that otherwise were not possible. And wherever you have a monopoly, you are going to have costs go up, right? And perhaps, again, one does not want to say colleges did not have and don't still have, and I think they'll be forced to innovate as social coordination gets better. And you may see colleges go for a communal effect like a YMCA. They may go into really kind of pushing into the experimental technology that they have there and the different resources, because I can't have a collider in my house, right? I can see them going heavy in the direction of the experimentation of very various fields that require high capital expenditure, so you have access to the technology to do it. I can also see colleges continuing to have a significant role in things like surgery and healthcare, where it's like very precise technical learning, right? You know, now I know there is robotics that are able to do surgery that is apparently incredibly accurate. So, you know, obviously that too can be innovative, but I can see that always having a certain role. And I can see the colleges always having the music hall where if you want to hear, you know, Eric Whitacre at Christmas, you would go there, right? But I actually think the social coordination may, in a good way, move colleges from being serving the ruling class primarily in a way that is economically problematic to having to be more open to the community and having more ways of access beyond the SAT based on other ways of, say, showing one's. I can also see them having to move out of a concentration on basically 18 to 30-year-olds to having to open up their market interest and customer base to all walks of life. Yes, you could go back at 60, say in many states for free, like Virginia, but very few people do that. But I could see them having to innovate in different ways. Because, and actually, I think it would bring, like, if literally the liminal web offers some of these networking social coordinations that colleges don't just have a stronghold on anymore, that is the loss of a monopoly that bring prices down. And then I think it would force colleges to focus on the things they could be good at, like the research and technology I was just describing, that then they could actually excel, right? So the liminal web, as we are so describing, doesn't necessarily have to be a replacement of college. It could be a competitive force that helps it move in that direction. And then one could also say that, yeah, I mean, perhaps a space like this would have never come into existence without colleges having a historical role to bring people together that invent the technology, that have the experiences outside of the classroom so that they can then come to a liminal web and make it possible. So there, but that's just historical development in a Hegelian sense, right? Like eventually you reach the limit of what colleges can do in what they offer, and then they hit that, there's a certain failure, but from that can come the next step in the historical phenomenological journey, to use that phrase from Gödel, right? So, you know, there's also an idea that, yeah, you can say, well, you know, if you have to go to college to then have the spaces outside of it, doesn't mean that's worth it. Well, it could have been worth it at a certain point in history, so people come to have that idea and knowledge so they can bring it online to create those spaces. But then does it have to continue to have a monopolistic necessity of the colleges for that revelation? Not necessarily, because now it's been democratized and now there's the technology for people to engage in that social coordination without having to pay the monopolistic prices, right? Which then would have a market impact on colleges to innovate in a more communal direction. So that's a way I would put it. I think it's very important not to go, oh, colleges have all, you know, there's no value there whatsoever. It's just that historic movement of hitting the contradiction, forcing the negation sublation, having that kind of saturation, to allude to the Ebert's work, that then forces innovation. So those would be some thoughts. Basically, if you do not have a monopoly on the social coordination function, that could be bringing down prices, that could lead to innovations that required history to come about, but once it comes about, may not so require it. And then colleges basically, well, then it's just market forces, because colleges have to say, we need to continue to like force people to use our certification so we can justify the prices. So we'll use government and law to basically outlaw any other ways of getting jobs except through us, so they can kind of tighten down, which unfortunately tends to be what power structures do when it comes to losing things. They tend to grip, or they could say, wow, this is so great. Humanity has figured out a way to have that experience outside the classroom without coming to college and paying prices. Boy, howdy, this is wonderful. Let's try to innovate to offer something new, since we no longer have the monopoly on that. Option B would be what, you know, one would hope the colleges would do, but unfortunately human nature tends to lead in the direction of A, which means that basically the shift will not occur until some sort of financial crisis, because economic force is out. You have a loss of demand that leads to debts not being paid for, and then only the biggest colleges survive, and then it becomes more monopolistic and all sorts of inefficiencies. So those would be some thoughts that come to mind. But let me give it to Mr. Jockin and then Tyler. Mr. Jockin.
Well, yeah, I mean, I kind of build on what you're saying, Daniel, and answering Michelle's question. I'm actually surprised two other parts weren't brought up. One was the introduction problem, Daniel, and what it was called introduction problem, or the onboarding problem. The whole point of most of especially what's happened over the last 20 years, 30 years, I would say, what's been decided is the introduction problem is going to be solved by extending the period of information introduction, basically all the way to effectively middle of masters, maybe even to the end of masters. I say that mainly because in most fields, you're not even touching secondary research-based presentations until you're master's level, let alone primary research. You're not touching that. You're not touching that till maybe most masters aren't even touching masters. Then, I mean, they're not touching primary research. They're mostly doing building on secondary research. The primary research is exclusively for the PhDs now. That was not always the case, especially in some fields like in design, for example. My favorite example is, it's hilarious in textbooks. Like people like Paul Rand, for example, never went to college. And he's in the textbooks. He's one of the exemplars of our field, for example. Or the amount of, I mean, that's plenty of examples of that. So I'm just bringing up, like, part of this is the issue of the introduction problem. I want to be fair. I think that everyone in this group has something to say, right? I have to tell you, from teaching undergrads, you know what the most painful thing to ever do is open a discussion about Aristotle and try to draw out something from the group. Crickets, nothing's coming out of these people, nothing. I mean, there's that, oh God, what is his name? Gregory Sadler, right? He's a great influence on YouTube. He's been around for a long time. Some of his old school lectures, like where they're live from the classroom. You got it. It's right there. You can tell it's an intro philosophy class, intro ethics, but they're wearing costumes. I mean, sadly, no costumes. But the point is, he's just that brutal. I've done this. I've experienced this myself. That complete, there's no fire. There's no logs as an educator to throw on to work with. So you got nothing to work with. There's nothing in the tank. That's what I meant by the introduction problem or the onboarding problem. They don't have enough gumption and content inside them or material inside them to work with, to get debate, to get discourse, to get all these other things. This is a very high level. I'm getting in here. So it's a very high level of sophistication of, you have to be a certain level of development. These little like seminar discussion groups like this is master's, if not PhD level work, where you're presenting accounts. And especially like this kind of group, especially Danny, we've talked about it before, to have like, okay, I'm Aristotelian Platonic background with some Aquinas and Al-Ghazali, right? And I got a bunch of Hegelian psychologists and other things like that. Like I'm very much the odd bird out here. And for me to operate here and kind of keep the map, I'm getting these accounts, and then I have to do a cross-reference to what did Aristotle say? What did Plato say? What do these other, my backgrounds give? See the agreements, see the disagreements, and you have to do this all high advanced level of thinking. That's a lot of value for me. But that's the point though. Like that's something, if I was just learning, I'd be host. Like I would just be overwhelmed. It would just be this great overwhelm. And just like you're stupefied. It's literally, you're stupefied by just how much is presented in front of you. So that's an introduction problem. So that means like only a certain caliber of person with a certain equipment can participate in this group effectively. Not having elitism, but just have the raw fact of like, there's a reason why you can't expect, an elderly person to bench press like 500 pounds. That's crazy. Maybe one hypothetically could, but this is a generic presupposition of a category that doesn't make any sense. They're not equipped to handle that much demand of work. So I think that's an important aspect to it. But the other aspect too, this is true in almost all schools a lot, is especially like any commuter college or any college that's not in a socially isolated environment, they have big problems of this idea of like time energy. Because guess what happens once the class is over? Woo! Everybody's out. Absolutely no. There is no pause. There is no allowances of basically redundancy or just like delay that allows for these overflow events, discussions in the hallway, doing a walk around the campus. This stuff doesn't happen if you are basically, as soon as the sanctioned time of class discussion has been completed, boom, you're out the door instantly for your next either priority or prerogative. I'm thinking of time energy. I think it's a very good notion of this. It's useless. Quite frankly, these secondary properties only work when you have a certain basically redundancy or kind of slack in your schedule that will allow you to participate in this matter. I mean, I even know this just, for example, like I would teach like discussion groups. So actually to solve the introduction problem, I would do introduction lectures or introduction dialogues from Plato, for example. But they would have to be off campus or off hours on a certain time. And the students had to have a certain availability and bandwidth to do it. So not only doing the coursework, they're also doing the secondary thing. Now it's very exciting that they were willing to do it. It's very cool, but I'm going to point out like that's the mechanism in play here, and it doesn't help. And that is affected by basically time energy. That concept is very useful for this idea. So that's kind of like the other two aspects of education. Is this issue of the introduction problem and the time energy to onboard these people and get them in a state of contribution. I mean, that's kind of the key. Is like, how do we get moving citizens or moving individuals to modes of contribution? And you have to have certain equipment to pull that off. Because that's the thing. It's like there's an onboarding period, which is a gestation period, and then articulation period. If I kind of give a general overview of pedagogical development, I think the main critique you can probably give is that we extend that onboarding period to such absurd lengths now. I only say that also because I just think of examples like, you guys ever see like a typical questionnaire of like, what would a high school student be expected to know in like the 1900s, for example? It's like, it's obviously college level kind of knowledge we would expect nowadays. It's just fascinating. Anyways, that's all I got.
No, that's magnificent. I'll give it to Tyler and then Mr. Parsons. And, all of what you just described, there's always been this giant debate. Is it the material condition that decides the fate of human beings? Is it the ideal condition, the ideas? What's very interesting is what you just described is a kind of material condition, but it is a material condition that affects how people can think, right? And for me, this is where, we've talked about it before. I'm very interested in the medium condition, like as a kind of middle, like what is the medium that incubates how people think or what they can think, right? So if you don't have the technology to ever, let's say 20 years ago, to ever adequately solve the introduction problem so that you can start having advanced network effects to bring the most of human capital, and who knows what that leads. And again, the argument hopefully we make in Belonging Again is that basically it is hard to explain the solo residual in economics, the great enrichment, wealth as independent from just like goods, without basically a fundamental metaphysical dimension with the meta in parentheses that is human. That is basically human creativity. Human creativity is not simply a product of ideas in a vacuum. It is affected by the material condition, but the material condition are things like what you were just describing, Mr. Jockin, which it's not merely the, do I have running water or not? Of course you need running water, but if you have that, there's the material condition of the form of learning itself. And this is, I think, the big issue is we've been like, oh, the way democracy works is, education. But what do you mean by education? Do you mean information? Do you mean like memorizing all the facts or stuff like that? Because there's very good evidence. Dempsey actually put out a lovely article about this, and this has been shown many times. Is information is not, you can give people all the information you want, and it could still be within the introduction problem and a lack of time energy, and it is not actually going to open the modes of consciousness to help people move outside, say, the logic of capital or the loss of time energy or the inability to, say, be toward the beautiful or virtue, right? So there's an additional medium condition that has to be thought, but here's, I think, for me, what's very important, and then it speaks to Tyler's question at the beginning of things that I think we see at the Conference of Theory Underground. Basically, until this moment in history, I don't think there was the technology of this YouTube Zoom mixture, the liminal web, the social coordination problem, to deal with a medium condition that would help train modes of consciousness to be able to operate in a way that would raise people to the occasion of democracy in the Tocqueville sense, to thinking outside the logic of avoiding the real in psychoanalysis, to be toward, on a greater scale, the beautiful, because that required a medium condition that simply could not deal with logistical or geographical or time restraints, right? Like once you're 35 and unloading trucks and have 3 kids, do you really have a regular ability to go listen to lectures on Aristotle or have a way of coordinating with the 16 people in the United States of America who are interested in this or willing to undergo having to figure out a Hegelian psychoanalysis mixed with Aristotle, such as yourself, Mr. Jockin? No, it's not really logistically possible. possible, but now it is with this mixture of the liminal web, right? So that opens up coordination possibilities that were not possible before, that because of that, I think has left us forever between the debate. Is it the material condition or is it the ideal condition? Is it economics or is it ideas, right? It's always been, it's back and forth forever. Oh, flip Hegel on his head. No, it's the concept that's moving or different things. Well, if we're talking about the problem of scale, then it is a medium condition, which is the infrastructure for the formation of the concept that is shared by people across different geographical regions, that overcomes the introduction problem, that as a result can unlock network effects that otherwise were not possible. And I think if we look at the digital that way, then we can see, oh, it's coordinating the real life, not replacing the real life, but coordinating it in a way that allows a medium condition that can help us overcome this infinite, endless debate on, is it the material or the idea that makes the world, right? You can say, oh, well, it's the condition that incubates the unfolding of the idea that is able to better coordinate itself. And then it's at a price that people can afford, because Zoom is not as expensive as college, last time I looked. So, I think Theory Underground, as the conference site, and then I'll give it to Tyler and then Mr. Parsons, highlighted what that looks like in the possibilities of the medium. And Dave and Nance and they emphasize, and Mike, there's an emphasis on Marshall McLuhan, the medium condition, on all, like the idea that Marx and medium and material and economics and the technology, all of these things are tied together. William Ong, I love Ong, all of them are speaking how there is a medium condition that organizes us that have to be addressed. And I think just everything you were describing is a description of a medium condition that college can't adequately deal with in its current form. Back to Michelle's question, well, that right there means you have a social adjustment that is possible, that would also have economic ramifications as well, I think. But let me give it to Tyler and then Mr. Parsons. Tyler, please.
Yeah, so Michelle's question of kind of like, what's the trade-off when we switch from going physically to a university to taking these kinds of classes at places like Theory Underground and Philosophy Portal? And yeah, we're saving a heck of a lot of money, but we're missing that potential to maybe find your future spouse, or really create these great friendships, or really learn outside of the classroom something that hasn't been clicking in the classroom. The question that I have been trying to formulate after being at TUConn was, and I'm probably going to struggle here, something to do with like exams, and that when I take, say, like a class from Mikey on, Lacan, it's not as though I don't necessarily know at the end whether or not I've understood objet pétillage. But that probably would still be the case even if I was going to, more to an institution that when it comes to that. But I guess what I'm thinking about is that these TUConn and the anthologies and stuff they almost function as the exam at these places. It is the time where, I was really feeling that it was important for me to actually go there and give my presentation to kind of see, has all, these last couple of years of learning this stuff, is it going to land with anybody? Am I comprehend? Can people understand what I'm even saying, or have I misunderstood this whole time? And so, yeah, I think that what I was so delighted by at TUConn was, this is it's like he's doing it. He's creating that just that perfect mixture where now for a lot of it, it's been this I need some very skilled teacher to explain these concepts, but then at some point I need to put my understanding to the test in some way. Yeah, I just want to throw that. I'm curious your thoughts on that, Daniel. And
I think that's brilliant. I think that's not to interrupt, please.
well, just because one thing that I kind of think about is just even with the net here, and I have this thing called Story Night, and on one level, I really love like what Story Night does. It opens it up for people to kind of speak in front of other people, but it doesn't necessarily mean that anybody's going to have something that like that profound to say. And that could potentially even be the case like here at the net, where I could just say dumb things all night. So anyways, just would love to hear your thoughts on that.
No, I think that's brilliant. Well, there's a few things. First off, like that idea of the live having some sort of test function or feeling like the test, I think there's something very profound to that. I think there is a kind of idea also, like, again, what's so interesting in some classical forms of education, the test was the oral exam or the ability of giving a speech or talking, or almost the Toastmasters kind of thing, or be able to present before Congress or something. Like the test was some sort of live presentation, right? Which I think it tends to be a better test, because just because you're a good test taker, when the pressure's on and you're feeling nervous and there are people in the crowd that disagree and you're going to use words and you're kind of not sure what they mean, can you do it live? Do it live! Do it live! So that right there is actually way more like what life is. Like, oh, yeah, sorry, everything went to crap and it relies on you now. Hope you know what to do. That's life, right? You don't get the time. The test is at noon tomorrow and there's going to be 30 questions. No, that's not. It's like, no, you have to go now. People, you're going to speak to these people now. And you're on that. It's kind of funny because there is all of these ironies. And again, there's something like, it seems suboptimal to get rid of the test, because then you can't grade it. And in that very suboptimalness, there's actually an opening up of something that seems kind of truer to life, or actually it feels more human. It's like, yes, we've tested it on the human level. I definitely think, like, it's hard not to read many philosophers, the great philosophers, and not be like, well, the test of the philosophy is life. Duh. You're going to go like, do this and see, right? Like, it's kind of like you're going to go see, right? Or you're going to actually live under this question and see how it forms you. You're going to circle this question for 20 years and realize, oh, the exam is the circling and the testing is that, right? And there's something about the live event that feels like the test to everything that you've been doing online, or the writing of the paper. I mean, for me too, like another test, and I know Mikey has mentioned this, I definitely agree with this, is like paying attention to your own life, or your ability to share ideas of what beauty is with the guy down the street, right? Who doesn't do philosophy, but they actually can see the way that you're presenting it, that there's a certain value there, that, well, actually, maybe reading novels isn't a waste of time, right? Can you show the man on the side of the road, as Illich would say, that there is something actually to all of this talk with the humanities and philosophies? No, they're not going to necessarily want to go read the Phenomenology of Spirit, but is there an ability to see a glimmer, right? There's a kind of test there, right? And also friendship. I mean, if you're gathering in these spaces, we mentioned that at the net, friends, but like, are these people you're seeing actually like friends? Like, you feel a certain bond to these people. If not, that too is a test, right? So there's something about what you're saying on the live event, and I'll give it to Mr. Parsons here, something on the live event having some kind of some sort of test exam to it, which of course is kind of funny because it's gone the road of giving up all of it's funny how doing the suboptimal or non-rational thing of not having the metrics or moving outside of school actually then allows the coming forth of a test that you don't even think of as a test, that feels like it actually is testing the quality, or that it actually is getting at the human, right? There are all these kind of funny inversions that can happen. But I think that was brilliantly put. I think there's a lot to that. I mean, I definitely, when I'm like, oh, I need to do, and I'll give it to Parsons and Javier here, I'm like, oh, I've got a conference on philosophy of right, and I need to, it's when? Oh, in 2 days? Oh, okay. Let's go. And that, there is something about that is quite powerful. So I really appreciated how you put that. That was wonderful. But let me give it to Parsons and Mr. Rivera. Mr. Parsons, it is good to see you, sir, and I hope you are doing well.
Hey, yeah, good to see you. Just everything's been great. And I was just thinking about what Thomas had brought up in with your social coordination problem and this introduction process. It brought me, back to Dave and they always talk about how they in their master's program they're still reading secondary text. They're not even getting into it, and how that's I think it's more and more trying to cater, like they say, cater to the students, because I think there is so much like stuff to pull their attention away and kind of bring down, what was once, liberal art, like rich tradition. I I also like I constantly think like how like I'm always in my head like hearing conversations, like I'll listen to Todd McGowan talk, or then he'll bring up something, and then I like, well, if somebody else brings up something, and you constantly want to have these what Dave calls these contradictions in your head, and you're like, and that's how I'm always. You'll say something, and then Daniel, and then I'll come back to it. I'm always like, I want to, like, if I could ask these questions here and now, but it's like I can never uh hold them long enough, and then they're kind of gone, and it seems like you're like Tyler was bringing up that these conferences or like teachers off after hours or all these um, points, they set up these what you call these median conditions that are kind of make for like a healthier learning space where like something like you would say like love, truth, beauty, these are where the you know they can birth these um, connections for people. Um, but it just seems like now, like with um, college universities, with the technological side of stuff, it's so much the trade-off is we're looking for the specialists more and more and more, and getting away from a rich liberal arts tradition that had given us so much in democracy and for ethics and what we had to lead us. And so what you had there in the college tradition, you also had like in the church or religious tradition for what we'd say not the intellectual. And it seemed like, but in communities, they would kind of rub shoulders with each other. And that is something else that's kind of gone away too now with, like you're saying, now people, and Michael had brought up that you're looking for your job, and now I've got to move 2 hours away from the family in this situation, that it seems like you're talking about these material conditions that you have to have, and these ideal, they keep getting ripped apart. And then so the median condition and these possible places where loving interaction can take place is people aren't feeling secure so much to come to places and voice ideas, and so you've got to come with your sure embedded ideas and beat people over the head with it, or else you're for somebody to come and question me, that's going to, whether that be we got our election coming up, and a conservative or liberal comes at me with their ideas, and that's where I'm so much like in the middle, that I'm like, I don't know. That's why I constantly feel hysterical, because I'm like, I don't know. And like but yeah, it's just something to think about. I was also just thinking, like, it seems like the material conditions too, like it seems like, yeah, that was it, that in between these material conditions, ideal conditions, and median conditions, that where we have like, it's almost meant to set up our desire, and our desire keeps getting like we can constantly run from it. There's something new there we can always reach for, and we escape being pinned in. And where I think in previous times you didn't have that, you couldn't run, and so it's just going to lock you into a drive. And now sometimes that drive was very detrimental, and you bring up that in belonging again, that you were trapped there before, but now we have all these spaces. It feels like we're free, but you're not really free. It's just the Coke or Pepsi choice. It's not the locked into a desire of something beautiful, like truth, beauty, goodness, things like that. So that is a lot, but
No, I think
thanks.
that's magnificent. It brought a few things to mind. Like, I'm glad what you were saying on the contrary, because something I wanted to note that I also think suggests the kind of test of the conference, and also a test of the space, is, and I'll give it to Rivera and Mr. Jockin, is that like a lot of times people, like when you come to the conference and you're talking about your own personal story with dusting, like you were, Tyler, that I thought was beautiful, or Dave was talking about time energy, or Mr. Eber was talking about freak theory. One of the difference is also presenting on your own idea. Like, okay, this is why I think beauty is, and yeah, we're going to talk about Hegel and we're going to talk about it, but there's also like, I'm going to stand for this idea or topic or personal story. Very often in a college setting, you can hide behind someone else's work. You can say, well, this is what this is what I'm just a scholar of, say, Walter Benjamin, and this is what Benjamin thinks, right? There's a kind of separation between the idea and you that actually, if you were to say, well, no, I want to talk about belonging again, you would never get a PhD for that. They'd be like, no, you may not. You have to be more specialized and pick on something the professor wants to do, right? So one of the other reasons why the conference or these spaces can be is like, even if it's not a conference, if you literally have to have a conversation about your own idea in front of people who are like questioning you, that in of itself has a certain unique testing function to it that I think is often outside the academic structure, right? Because that's you can't say, well, yeah, but that's what Walter Benjamin said. You like very often when you listen to many specialists, they're just constantly telling you what some thinker said, right? And it kind of creates a separation. Now, don't get me wrong. Then there's the ditch of never reading anybody because you have your original ideas and they're not very good because you haven't gone through the greats, right? But then there's a going through the greats and staying hidden in the greats, if you will, right? When actually it's the return to common life thing. Like you don't want to just stay with your ideas without doing any work because then they're probably not very good, but you don't know they're not very good because you haven't gone through the ringer, right? But then you go through the academic life and you never come out the other side because you can always just hide behind other people, right? That doesn't seem very good, but that seems to be what gets you a job, right? On just being the scholar on medieval literature or something, right? With an expertise on Chaucer. And it's like, but what do you think about like, oh, I don't know, the beautiful, Chaucer? You can just kind of hide and actually almost be kind of puffy about it. Be like, how dare you ask me about the beautiful? I am an expert on medieval literature and you need to get serious and start talking about it's precise thinker, not be talking about the good, true, and beautiful. Like you get that from a lot of academics, like trying to go into your own idea belonging. Why are you talking about belonging? Let us talk about, like some specialized thing. And it's like a smack in the face kind of thing, right? Like, but that culture, I think, takes away the possibility of the kind of exam that you're talking about, Tyler. That is where you come out to give a presentation that is bringing together your own personal story with what you've learned from Boothby, with your own relationship to dusting, and why you think that is important, right? That sort of presentation, I actually think the college system does not really allow. If you wanted to do that, it would be very difficult. Maybe if you're a professor emeritus and you're 72 years old, you don't care what anyone thinks anymore, then you can do your own idea, and then you get a heart attack and die. So I think that is another element of this, and I'm glad what you said, Parsons. And then also what you were saying on the medium condition training us, like it then actually, to use that example I was just giving, it trains our desire to only want to hear conversations of that academic tone at the conference. We don't want to hear the personal story or people's own unique ideas that they've been working through. We actually can almost train our desire to reject that sort of thing, which then feeds you back into the traditional kind of learning. And I definitely think it trains our desire in a manner that then makes it, well, let's put it this way. If what we're doing, we can associate with something suboptimal, which maybe is more like the dwelling of Ivan Illich. Basically, you are trained by the optimization of the system to be incapable of dwelling. Your desire can't dwell, which then actually opens up possibilities that can occur. You end up always being taken. On and on and on and on. There was also something I think I wanted to note, and then I'll give it to Rivera and then Jockin, about like, yeah, there's also something about another benefit of the digital in being distanced from the real is the ability to experience people vulnerable while not being in the same room. So you can actually get used to experiences of vulnerability or people telling you what they think of God or their own personal story. That gets you used to hearing those kind of conversations so that you yourself can feel permission to engage in those conversations as well. Likewise, hearing people talk about their own project at work, you then feel permission to do your own. So there's also the gap between the real and the digital also allows new habituses of coming to learn what it means to be vulnerable in a way. Well, because another problem is if you introduce vulnerable conversations to earlier, you can have emotion Olympics that happen in groups where people are then doing the Olympics to show they're the most emotional and vulnerable of everyone there. So like a power dynamic comes in based on emotion. That can occur, but then we're being vulnerable, so it's good. But then vulnerability is cherished and no one's thinking any ideas anymore. So then you get like a mob of the vulnerable and it becomes anti-thought. But then you can have the mob of the philosophy that becomes anti-emotion, right? So how do you balance that? Well, you need people habituated to boast at a rate gradually that they can handle to learn the art of doing both. And that's where the divide between the digital and the real could be an asset to providing the space to learning those kind of things, those kind of distancings, which make me think of like the conversations on God that Mr. Rivera has been doing, where you're like learning those experiences and seeing it as a model and working on that. So, Mr. Rivera, how are you doing this evening, sir?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. I'm glad I could pop in. God, there's so many thoughts that you like triggered a lot, Daniel. It was like a chain reaction in my head. I was trying to keep it all together. Um, no, it's weird, right? Because I did a lot of like volunteer, like group kind of like teaching assistant, holding groups to have conversations about the reading that we did. And what I noticed was like a lot of people were just like afraid of being stupid, really. I mean, that was really the thing. And it's really hard because it's like, yeah, it's like, it's okay. Like we can say dumb things. Like nobody's got to say something smart here. And it's hard to explain the process of just like, you could stumble, on something profound if you're willing to say something stupid. If you're willing to say something stupid. I've said many, many stupid things. I still do. So it's and so it's really it's kind of sad a little bit. It's really hard to get them to open up. Definitely a lot of trust to like, I guess, not feel judged and saying something stupid. And then, I've also learned a lot with just like talking to my girlfriend about like philosophical things that I wasn't like trying to start a philosophical conversation. It's just one of those things where you're just like, you're the person I'm with. Like, I just want to share these things with you, right? I just want to share these things with you, right? And you can say like I encounter, forms of resistance because it's for her, she's afraid of saying something stupid. And then, one day I got like really pressed on like why philosophy, like why should she care about this thing? And usually for probably like the random person on the street saying that to me, I probably wouldn't have like entertained it too much. But since she's actually someone I'm with, I was like, well, I guess this conversation is going to have to happen, right? But the best argument I made for it was just like philosophy for me is like it gives you a language. It gives you a language, right? It gives you any philosopher you read, whether it be Plato, Aristotle, Heidegger. It's insane, right? It's like these guys learn a whole new language, right? You got Thomas saying, Greek words and how important it is, right? It's a language. You got Heidegger and being and this concealing. It's a whole new language that you're learning, but it opens up a field of articulation for yourself. And that was kind of my argument to my girlfriend, is just like, look, when we lose values, when we lose our sense of like, the way the world is and all that stuff, what can happen is like we lose our voice to articulate things. And when we read philosophers or whatever, like, we shouldn't approach it like this guy's going to convince me of a worldview. It's like this guy's going to give me a language. He could convince me. I think that's maybe a byproduct. Like I could be convinced by the argument, but that's always going to change in philosophy. So for me, the thing is, it's going to give you a language. And I noticed that a lot of people are, language insufficient. Like they don't have the language. They don't know how to express themselves. And I'm pretty sure Aspasea, encounters the same thing in the therapy room. Like it's, there's both sides, right? Like in therapy, you're trying to get them to express something. And then in the philosophy world, it's like to articulate yourself to the best that you can. And can you imagine if you couldn't articulate yourself to the best of your ability, how frustrated you would be? You know? And it's like I can see that in people though. I can see how frustrated they get when they can't articulate themselves. You know, and the thing is, they're talking to other people that also struggle to articulate themselves. Right. And it's such a frustrating thing. And so it's for me, I keep up with philosophy because I'm like, it's a language. Like you need something to articulate, you know, especially when something that's pertinent in your life, you know, whether you need to learn about anxiety or, you know, how to understand God. So you read theology, like those are languages to relate to something. You know, this is why like I came up with the word like limit negative. Why did I come up with the word limit negative? Because I noticed that there was things that we would talk about like death or suffering. These things don't actually change. There's always going to be suffering and there's always going to be death. So that means that there's actually a limit, in a sense, to the negative, right? But we have a way of skirting around this stuff and creating more suffering without dealing and facing the limit negatives, right? Facing death, facing suffering. People talk about this all the time, but I feel like when you articulate like there's a limit negative, like, yeah, there's a limit. You know, if you keep trying to go past that limit, you create this excess that kind of folds on top of itself. And so people are not only in their suffering, but also doubling down in their suffering. They're creating more suffering by kind of not being able to face it. And then, yeah, the last note, I don't know where I was going with that. Yeah, just articulation. The other thing is, I think, was it Tyler? Yeah. The economic thing. I mean, this is what made me think, this is why I was telling you, Daniel, about like, yeah, you've convinced me on the whole economic problem. Like, we have an attention problem because we have an economic problem, right? Like the whole, you know, God would take care of everything, right? The Christian paradigm. But the thing is, it's up to us to actually set the conditions so God can, quote, take care of everything. And can you imagine if those conditions were met, right? Like if we didn't have to worry about what food to eat, if we didn't have to worry about, you know, my job or how much money I was going to get paid to cover this rent, where would my attention go? Where could my attention be free to go and wonder and be interested in? What am I depriving my actual interest in if it weren't for the fact that I'm always worried about getting fed, having to pay my bills, taking care of like just a bunch of things, you know, and they all add on to each other. And everything is your individual responsibility, right? Like even parents feel it, right? Like it's just always the parents' fault. It never points to like a communal issue. It's always like, no, it's the parents, right? They have to do it. You know, so, you know, I mean, of course there's dangers about, you know, if everything gets taken care of, like there's boredom, there's those threats, but, I feel like boredom's a really good avenue to discover what you might be interested in too. So, yeah, I'll leave it there.
No, magnificent. Well, it could easily be the case that boredom, anxiety, and things like, you know, anxiety in the sense we mean it in the 18th century are products of the lack of a social coordination mechanism. Like you know, maybe a lot of boredom is due, and a lot of time energy problems are due to an ineffective social coordination mechanism. Everything you said on language was magnificent. Obviously Wittgenstein once said that the limits of my language are the limits of my world, and he basically wanted to argue that much of philosophy was just bad language, right? That if you fix the language, you give it to the philosophy. I think what you're pointing at, that I think is exactly the case, is that no, philosophy is the limit of language. It is the limit. Based on the languages you learn, you determine where the limit is, and you can actually move the limit. And so to say like the limits of my language are the limits of my world, well, it's basically to say like that language is not what overturns philosophy, but it actually is the business of philosophy, because language is not merely words as signifier signified, and that's where we got lost in that entire trail of language philosophy. But language is actually lenses. Ideas are practically eyes. The way we speak actually impacts the way that we experience reality. Rita Dove, as we've said before, she said that the death of the word is the loss of the capacity of an experience. Like if you lose a word, this is why she defends poetry. She's like, poetry matters because if you don't have poetry, it literally will impact your ability to experience reality. And so likewise, I think when you say, like you're saying, philosophy functioning as a kind of language actually is certainly the case. And then, you know, there's all this idea that, oh, the more languages you learn, the more experiences you can have. But very often we don't think of the humanities very, like Faulkner's a language. I mean, like the humanities are in the business of modes of being that are fundamentally linguistical, because human beings have something about language that makes them what they are. So learning a language is learning a humanity, and the philosophies in teaching you a language are teaching you ways to be human that otherwise you couldn't do. And we've also lacked a social coordination mechanism through history by which to well coordinate those languages in ways that could unlock network effects that who knows what they would do. And also too, if Jonathan Rauch is correct on freeing speech basically if Jonathan Rauch is correct on speech and language being the test of ideas and information coordination, if Dietrich McCloskey is correct that the unlocking of the tongue is the unlocking of wealth creation, then the spreading of philosophy, if it indeed has some sort of unlocking of the tongue effect on them, would have economic impacts, social impacts. Jonathan Rauch and Kindly Inquisitors, the impact would be large. And, you know, what did Caputo say at the beginning of his book? That Derrida unlocked his tongue, right? There is this interesting idea that the right philosopher and the right idea can unlock your tongue, right? That's weird. It's almost as if you learned how to say something, like learning a language. Oh, so, you know, you encounter the right idea, then there's something that's unlocked. And the point also that you said that, you know, I think about a lot is there's a kind of creeping silence you'll see happen in relationships. Gradually, slowly, the couple doesn't speak to one another. The friends don't know what to say. A kind of enclosure effect comes upon people's lives with time because they've been hurt. You get into a room and just they're at dinner and they don't really say much to one another. There's a lack of speaking that can occur. But it's not the intimate silence. There is a silence that's the kind of intimacy that is the comfort of not needing to speak that can be virtuous. No. There are different kinds of silence. There are different qualities of silence. This is the silence that I think many, not that I've ever been a therapist or in the office like that, but I think this is the silence that you see in those places where people are just, they're husband and wife, they're having marital problems, but the tongue, they can't free the tongue, right? The silence of doom. That's well put, Aspasia, right? That kind of silence of doom. Michelle and I will talk. I actually think that philosophy counters that. There's something about what you learn in philosophy that teaches you how to find a new angle to get in there. Because often the silence that comes up between partners is because it's too direct. Like it's like there's a wound. Like if you've got a wound here and I touch it, you scream and go, ah, and you're hurt. Like, what are you doing, right? People do that to one another all the time, right? But in only having one language of engagement, every time they speak, the person's hurt or upset. So then they eventually just stop talking. The silence of doom sets in, right? And you see this in relationships all the time. Yeah, it's wanting to say something and not being presently articulated. Like that in enclosure, the silence of a kind of enclosure you experience, right? That you see in relationships or between people, where there's this kind of insulation effect that occurs. I strongly believe that philosophy actually helps with that. That it actually provides meta-analysis, the ability to take different perspectives. Like one of the things, if anything philosophy can teach you, you said it at the beginning, Javier, I'm stupid. Philosophy is really good at teaching you I'm stupid. Well, if you go into a relationship and there's like a problem and the thought enters your head where you think it's all their fault, they're stupid, they don't, and you go, wait, I remember something. Oh, wait a minute. I'm stupid. I learned that. Maybe I'm misunderstanding this whole thing, right? Oh, wait, I learned about self-deception and like the way logic works to enclose us. Maybe that's happening here. Maybe that's why this anniversary dinner sucks. Oh, I remember that. Maybe I should incorporate that into this. Like that is a huge deal. And I really do think philosophy helps you with this. Like, it is very relationally beneficial because you have that ability to go, no, you're the stupid one. Oh, right, I'm the stupid one. Oh, I remember this. This could be my fault. Oh, yes, it could be. Oh, I remember from Chekhov how people always misunderstand one another. That could be happening. That could be happening. And so that, like, that philosophy, that move to fight the enclosure, the silence of doom, is utterly invaluable, and it won't get you a job, but you really won't care about your job if all your relationships suck. So I think it's a good investment to learn these skills. But I loved what you said, Javier. Let me give it to Mr. Jockin and then Michael. And if anyone has final things to say this evening, please. But Mr. Jockin.
I'm sad Javier had his phone die. What a shame. I wanted to add on what he wanted to say. A lot of good points. By the way, I think it was, yes, Andrew's points. I think about attention, desire, and love kind of being related. It's very accurate. I say this because I noticed for myself, when I started getting into boxing, I was very captivated by the exemplars. Because what happens, you watch Mike Tyson, you would watch James Toney, you would watch boxers. I'd watch boxers that would inspire me. And that was very important because what that meant was I had now an image to refer to and reference and be like that person. And by the way, Daniel, your comment before, reply to me about the mentor model and that mode of, I'm going to trust this person, basically a mode of trust. This person, whatever he's teaching or talking about, I'm doing that. Oh, I had that exact experience. My mentor was a type designer. I didn't know how type design even existed before I met him. And I made my decision to study type design with him for that reason. And simply because it was actually a mode of the beautiful from Symposium, beautiful activity of thought and action, things like that. It was the beauty of his way of thinking that struck me as like, I want a mind like that. And I'm going to do whatever it takes to get it, which required, it actually leads to that issue of the introduction problem. There's rote training that has to be done. Sorry, it just is you don't get to go to the high level activity without the rote training, the fundamentals. That's true in boxing. That's true in the arts. It's true in every discipline. There's some dog homework you just got to do. And you have to have something that you persistently love, regardless, that you're willing to endure that pain of boredom, repetition. My God, the amount of repetition is what no one talks about how painful repetition actually is in a lot of ways when it comes to training. But that's a big part, doing something that's mundane, boring, repetitious. Every discipline has it. It's not the sexy part, it's the hard part, but that's basically the fundamental, that's the gate of access to get into the higher levels of activity. By the way, what these examples point to is a logos, an account. I like translating of logos, not just as word. You can certainly translate it. This is actually good. Actually, that's why I wish Javier was on the line, because this is a good example of it. My training of philosophy in Aristotle and Plato, and our scholars in that community have understood that logos generally can mean not just word, but it means account. It's a more appropriate meaning in those contexts and in that account. It's a paradigma. It's a pattern of understanding. So as a result, I'm very sensitive to know, as Javier said, there's a lot of terms I have to use the Greek for, because I know that gets conflated with too many other associations. If I don't use a Greek or Arabic term to refer to this thing, and I can give a translation to it, but it's not the same. I say this because the account, it's what it gives, what's the mode of legibility, what's intelligible via the subject. I say that because in education, a lot of times the reason why those specialists have absolutely no interest in talking outside that parameter is because they're not going to get cited. They go to that citation count. That's what counts, your citation count of your papers. And that's why we have this mechanism of the grad student who has to work by secondary literature, because by doing that, they're citing another scholar, and whoopsie-daisy, that adds to the count. So that's the measure and the mechanism of operation that's in that context. That's noticed by what you measure is what kind of activity and reality you're going to get. So we're going to ask the hypothetical question, what would be another measure? This is why what makes my next major project with Plato and Aristotle is the question of beauty and measure. Hugely important, because it's the exact point. What you measure dictates the reality, because, and this is why language as an account is very powerful. I would say the human soul is the instrument, and the lens that filters the perceptions of experience is the account. And it's very true. A very powerful account transforms experiences into new ways. And I can't even say this in terms of like, again, I wish Javier was in the group, but so like my conversation with him on God, I've never really had a candid conversation with an ex-Muslim per se, especially a convert. So basically a non-cultural Muslim coming into it. There were realizations that came up in that conversation that I never vocalized until that moment. And once I said it, I'm like, oh, wait, yes. Like I knew intuitively the reality of that. And most important than connecting with Daniel, your project of belonging again, of the major distinction between meaning and belonging. You can absolutely have meaning, but not have belonging. And actually the demonstration of that conversation with Javier drew that out. My relation, the mosque as a coordination of meaning is very true, even for the convert or the basically second, third generation Muslim that's kind of nominally Muslim, but not actually Muslim. You get a sense of meaning with the mosque, with the medrib, or take your other religious denominations, but you don't have belonging. That's the distinction. So my point is but I only had the articulation of that. It was kind of like at ready. It was only through the conversation with Javier that through that accounting of discussion with them, a phenomenon that I thought was unique to me, or just kind of a peculiar little quirk, was actually repetitional pattern. It repeated in other people's experiences. This is what accounts can give you, or logos, right? Can give you that. And part of that is the habituation via the exemplars, the images that are drawn up of what kind of person you want to be. Because basically there's a deep relationship of love, desire, attention, and knowing. Basically, I say because techniques are kind of knowing by doing, right? So by learning boxing, you learn a way of doing. There's a certain operation of road techniques and methodologies and figures and patterns that make you a boxer. By doing those things and knowing those things, you are a person. So knowing, being, and doing are all kind of related by love and desire. And the exemplar gives you that. So that's why kind of tying, it's like part of the coordination mechanism is the exemplars. An educator can be that. So thus, the educator, by its measure, one can make a question of how many citations do you have? That makes you a great professor. That's the measure. Or it can be, what kind of practitioners have you generated? It's a very different kind of measure now, isn't it? So that's a very different kind of parameter and difference. I think also, and actually, I'm going to give an example of the account, why it makes a huge difference. So here, and the discussion, because obviously, my project is the beautiful, so almost any conversation about it comes up. Here's something really interesting that draws out. So kalos, the beautiful that is in Plato and Aristotle, was really powerful. And it's only came from working with my students in my course that they we did some operations of usually give a term, show me the contrary. By you showing an oppositional contrary, you can draw out the reference points of what's being kind of triangulate what's being said. The cologne it can be like converted to the bad. Like there is one conversion that maps on with the good. So the agathos and the cologne do have one mode of contrary that do overlap to both. That is true. However, there is another contrary for cologne that is distinct to it. It's what gets translated as the asynchronous, the unflowing, the blocking of flow. I'm giving you kind of English translations of that term. This is actually I want to tie that. I wrote that note down because Daniel, this note about relationships and this kind of silence, it's a blocking of flow, a lack of intimacy, right? But that's what we're getting at here, is that there's a kind of stiffening of the relationship. You're asynchronous. You're not flowing. That is inherently ugly. That's the point. So thus the contrary of the beautiful in the relationship, that being an example of it. And thus, what's the positive affirmational? The free flow, the improvisational, the kind of effortless fluency. And then actually ties another point, by the way, Daniel, of the working from your tradition or working from your specialist training to generate new ideas. I've used this term fluency or legibility. These are not Aristotelian and Platonic ideas. This is me applying basically typographic visual design concepts to Aristotle, Plato. So I was able to kind of triangulate and see what Plato and Aristotle are trying to say. And there's certain properties that a key concept would point to very quickly, will allow more succinctly for me to get to that point faster, and parts of that. But that's my point. This is a if I was worried about literature citations, I can't use fluency that way. No literatarian would understand what I mean, and no Platonic thinker would understand what I mean. And then the problem with the designers, they wouldn't understand what I mean, which is the way I'm using it in this discussion with Plato and Aristotle. You see that's you see. So if my concern is to be cited, this isn't going to work because there's the measure blocks off that possibility from even happening. That's why I got yield.
No, that's magnificent. And if books like those on the, like the guy at Oxford who did the book on the Silk Road, I know Quinn on how the world made the West, like there's all these different economists and different people that are like, yeah, the world was actually made by the roads and the people encountering people or these groups that are on the side. Basically, if that is true, then the mechanism of citation in the name of higher education is exactly an incentive structure that erodes the possibility of higher education. So it's really important, in my opinion, to know the history of ideas or the history of like where education comes from, because if you do not do that, you may have, say, in the background of your citation, perhaps a overly civilizational or stagnant notion of ideas. And what we need to do is really focus on that thing and continue to cite it to build it up. Well, that, of course, you know, that's the epistemology of focus that can be very, very useful. But if it is overfit or it is overly moralized, those incentives can lead to inefficiencies in the system. You know, and that, like, what's so odd is, like, on the history of various trade routes, like, the most important thing of the city is the roads between the cities. Now, if there are no cities, there are no roads by which to connect them. But if you had cities without roads, they don't tend to thrive very well. And it's not by chance that, you know, civilizations that tend to do very well are close to what? Oceans, water. And especially when they get maritime power and no one else does, but they do. So they have the benefit of the roads, and then they can encounter diversity that other people can. And then, of course, they may have to spend less on military defense because they have these very useful things called oceans to protect them, right? But the point is that access to flow translates directly into political, economic, and social power and benefits, right? Well, in a similar way, like you were saying about flow and unblocking. So yeah, there's something about philosophy that can help the relationship flow again. I think it's similar to like when you feel like life is stagnant, having philosophy, like philosophy and ideas are coordination functions. Life doesn't feel like it's flowing. So I need to figure out different ways to make it flow or dance or feel beautiful or have the motivation or make things kind of move in the Maximus or, you know, Dante-esque way, right? Well, you can turn to philosophy to be like, well, maybe I should take up art. What is art? And then you say, well, this, that. So this is what I could do with it, right? There's something about all ideas having some sort of potential to embark in the coordination of materiality. And then the question is, what's the metric of success? The return of the flow or not, right? Is the fluency there or not? And that is, I think, really powerful. And it makes me think about, and then I like what you were also saying about account. I think that is beautiful. Giving an account. I think also what I would say is it makes me think of the live event as a test again, because one of the key things that exam does when you give a live presentation is you find out if you can face your fear or not. And arguably, that's like the most important exam of all. Can you overcome fear? Like you might become a real, yeah, there's always a certain, so tests created fear, but I always thought tests created stress. I think fear and stress are not necessarily the same. I think they get blurred together, but there's a certain stress in the academic test of if I do bad, I will not have a good job, right? And that can be linked to fear. I'm not saying it's the same thing, but it is very interesting how precisely in a like live presentation, there's a kind of fear that seems distinct from that stress. Mr. Jockin, please.
I'm gonna just tie into that. So do you remember that conversation about, I was supposed to give a public speech that I got at the bar and then there was no mic, no nothing. Basically the point is like excellence, I would say, shows through even through stressors. So even though under stress or under stressors or stress or demand, there's still a shining forth. So that's the point. So that by your excellence, you're shining forth even in the stress. And that's kind of the marker of it too, is that under less than ideal conditions, excellence shows through. That's true in sports too. Michael Jordan's fever performance, for example. So under are times where, or boxers who win even when their shoulder is located, for example. There's all these great examples of excellence showing through in difficulty. So I think that's intent. That's a reason. I just want to add that point in.
But I think it's a great association because the live performance allows that possibility of creative rising to the occasion, whereas a test on paper, you either know it or not, especially if it's not written. Like, there's something about how the live performance precisely allows the opportunity of the unexpected. And that's why it seems to be a more human test, because one, you have to face your fear. Two, something could happen. The mic might not work. The technology might be off. Someone might counter you and say, that's stupid, right? There's the possibility of the surprise that then is also truer to life, because what seems so important about being human is facing fear and being able to handle the unexpected. And that doesn't seem like it's afforded so much by the test on paper. You either know it or not. There's not really a creative way to, and like maybe you can guess really well or something, but it seems different. Like what you're saying about the possibility of a certain excellence coming through. I think so much of life is about those moments where a surprising excellence comes through, or proving able to have that excellence come through, which from your example, which was so great, tends to be when something unexpected or a mistake or an error occurs that you could easily say, it's not my fault, my presentation was bad because y'all screwed up the mic. No, the noble thing is to not use that as an excuse, but nevertheless have the skills to rise to the error to make something powerful that otherwise could not occur. None of that, all of that seems possible in the live event, in the live space. Also, you have to face the fear of, what if we go out and get something to eat and I don't know what to say? You know, there's also those tests of the literal, like, meeting in person and what occurs, right? That seems so important and also humanizing. And actually, I do wonder if, you know, another thing that happens too, that's such, and then I'll give it to Michael and then Tyler here. Like, a lot of people talk about imposter syndromes, like feeling like, oh, I don't belong here, or, you know, stuff like that. You know, even like Nobel Prize winners in literature will talk about, like, I think Maya Angelou always would say things like that. I also think there's something powerful about the live event working against imposter syndromes, because you can also be like, they're human too. I'm human. Oh, we're all human. And then when you also realize the excellence comes from the network effect, I think that also too works against imposter syndrome, because you start to realize that, wait a minute, ideas come to me that I've never had before because I'm in this situation to think things. And that also works against status anxiety and things like that. Mr. Jockin.
Just jump in one more time. I mean, just the note I wrote in my Substack like 2 weeks ago about that very fact, like in the net, something I said, I had no recollection I even said it. A colleague of mine was like, "Oh, Thomas, that was fantastic what you said." I was like, "Wait, what did I say?" I didn't recognize. I had no recollection. He had to send me the YouTube link clip of me talking in the net to say and point that help me recollect it. So I just want to point that out too. Like at the highest level, there's a self-forgetting in your discipline. That's the key. If you're a sign of you over, the imposter syndrome is actually it's kind of egotism, because you're basically creating a separation between you and your capacity and your knowledge or whatever function we're talking about. When you're in a complete mode of self-forgetting, almost in the discipline, this doesn't come up. It's not even a thought process.
No, I think it's because in the same way that I think boredom can reflect a lack of a social coordination problem, I think status anxiety often can be a result of a lack of social coordination mechanisms that hinder network effects that help you realize that, oh, the full flourishing is always because of a network and connections of people, right? And that also comes out in the live event. So there's also that. I think also there's always another tension between, is it the individual or is it the collective? The I, is it everyone? The other thing is, in the social coordination, you learn how it's both, but not in a lame way. You learn how you learn how the bothness actually functions to understand, oh, I can see where the individual bringing their own experience and work and readings and thoughts makes the community really powerful. But then I also see how the community brings out of that material that individual brought a network effect that otherwise could not occur. Oh, I see how the I and other, I see how the individual and community go together. Okay, it doesn't have to be a choice between a lame, you know, a simplistic, you know, individualism or a simplistic, you know, collectivism that gets everyone killed or something, right? Like there's always that tension. Well, once you experience it, then you get it. And the more you get it, then you can, and then that has political and economic ramifications, right? Because how much is political and economic simply a reflection of, do you think it's the individual or do you think it's the collective, the state or it's always caught between those things. Getting that has to be lived. Like getting that, I think you really get that when you live it, but then that's that then depends on a social coordination mechanism for the democratization of that and spread of that experience to help think those things. Let me give it to Michael and then Tyler here. Michael, please.
Yeah, so many great things. I actually had to start taking notes, which I'm going to have to now decipher all of these diagrams and things that I drew that are not coherent and not like chronologically linked. But I wanted to go back to something Javier said, which yeah, I'm also disappointed that he had to drop off because there was something he said about philosophy giving you a language and an ability to articulate. And he mentioned, like in the absence of having that language, there's a frustration. There's a certain kind of feeling space that you really want to put your finger on, but you can't express. And it's like, and it kind of compounds the problem because it's like it takes this maybe despair or frustration or lack of some kind and then adds the ability or the inability to express it to that, and it's kind of this kind of like doubly problematic thing. And it kind of connected some dots in my mind about like this inkling that I've had for a while of the connection between philosophy and something like therapy. And what it helped me to realize is like why I think a lot of people find themselves in therapy is not necessarily that they like don't know how or like that they're having these like volatile emotions that are like kind of uncharacteristic of like the like healed person or like the socially adjusted person, but it's the lack of language. It's like the lack of ability to like accurately pinpoint like what it is that I'm feeling. And there's a certain sense of like if you are armed with that language, you can take responsibility for your own internal experience, and then that kind of starts to dissolve the, oh, it's their fault, it's the microphone's fault, it's the society's fault, it's like the external like the location of blame on the external, I think is alleviated by the ability to have language. It's like an empowerment. It's like a certain I think maybe that's like part of the like pen is mightier than the sword thing. It's like it's not just that the pen can be used to manipulate and deceive and start wars, which yeah, it also can, but it also can like be used as like a weapon for like agency and autonomy. And so yeah, that just like really connected a lot of things for me, and I'm really thankful to him for that. And I also wanted to talk about like what Jockin was talking about with like these exemplars and models as ideals for us to aspire to, like images for us to that magnetizes us towards a certain way of life that compels action and thought and belief. And how it's funny, like I think about like my journey into becoming a therapist was in large part due to like my own therapist and like wanting to experience life through the way he was able to see me and hold me. And how like if we think about like what motivates a lot of professionals, specifically academics, is their own the amount of citations they have, the amount of credentials they have, the amount of speaking engagements they have, right? Like all these incentives, and like how many of them are actually incentivized by like the number of people that are inspired to change their life as a result of like being in relationship with them. Like imagine if that was the like how you judged the success or failure of a teacher, right? Like instead of like their own, you know, how many it's like how many of their students cite them in a paper versus how many of their students change the course of their life even in a small way, you know, as a result of being with them. You know, the amount of professors that students want to take every single class, even if it means that they're you know, falling behind in their like graduation time or whatever. Like that's that should be the standard by which we judge our teachers. And I think school would look a lot different. Like the kind of, you know, people talk about like the third spaces, like there would be a lot more of those. Or maybe the primary spaces would be ones that were so fruitful and worthwhile that you wouldn't even need to create as many of like the third spaces. But yeah, I feel like there was something else. Oh, the last thing I wanted to talk about was like Daniel, you talking about like fear versus stress. And I think that's so apt and really great. Like I think there's something about the live event that allows you the space to discover something new, and where stress is much more about like trying to control an outcome or trying to perform like a task that like everything's kind of laid out for you. Like in a multiple choice test, it's like there's stress. Yeah, it's like I want to try and get an A on this test, but like you know what the parameters of the test are. You kind of more or less know what the material on the test is going to be, versus like the fear of like a public speaking engagement is like I'm kind of like my beliefs and my ideas are kind of being held to the fire, right? And like is everyone going to hate me at the end of this? You know, like, am I going to lose all my friends? Like, there's like a social acceptance piece to it. And there's also like will I crash and burn? Or like, will all the thoughts that I hold in my head that I think are so amazing, like just fall flat in front of like an audience? And I think there's more existential weight to it, because like if that, like, you know, if you go up and give a presentation on something you've really worked and thought about a lot and care a lot about, it's like there's like skin in the game that you as a person have, as opposed to like taking a test. It's like it wasn't designed by you. It's most likely not in a subject that you really give a shit about. Like it's really not for you. It's like for someone else. And I think fear, like it necessitates like a self-involvement in the process. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say. And this has been great. And also I will say this Luigi is a lot smarter than the one I interacted with on the Wii. So you know, that's thank you for maturity. And
Well,
being
you're
an
very
adult.
kind, but he is probably a better plumber though. And you're not going to really care much about Hegel when your toilet blows up. So, you know, it'd be like, oh, okay. But no, that was magnificent. Absolutely magnificent. And, you know, it's almost like, I like what you're saying on fear, because it's almost like, I don't even know what the metric is. I don't even know what it would mean if I do a good job. I don't even know. And yet I'm here and I'm doing it. And maybe it's okay because maybe I don't know what the metric is. So if I screw up, I won't know it. No, I think I'll know. Like all of that is very interesting, because stress is almost like, will I meet the mark? Fear is, what is the mark? And that seems to be also truer to life. Life is more like, what is the game again? What is winning? Is it making a lot of money? Because is it not making money? Well, that doesn't seem it. Well, what is the mark? What is the mark? And yeah, that's why I think the emphasis on facing fear is so important, because facing fear is facing the I don't know the mark. And yet I believe there is one. I do believe there's a metric. I do believe there's a mark, and it seems to be, but then suddenly philosophy comes in. It's like, yeah, it's something like beauty and flow and self-forgetfulness, and you know the quality when you know it, but you need training to sense the quality. Well, how will I know when I sense the quality? Well, you'll know. It's just like asking, when will I know when I see the color red? When you see the color red. But when will I know when I see the color red? When you see the color red. That's kind of the promise of philosophy. Philosophy is like, you'll know the beautiful. When will I know that I know the beautiful? You will. Oh, okay. But that's the promise. The promise is some experience that you'll know is the experience when it happens. And until then, don't ask too many questions. Okay. But that's true to life, because like the most romantic moments come at you indirectly, right? Like the most incredible moments in life seem to be something that happens indirectly, not something like C.S. Lewis said, if you want to have the best way to guarantee a bad conversation is to tell everyone we're about to have a good conversation. Then you're screwed. Like the moment you tell everyone today I'm going to paint something, then you don't. The moment you say I'm going to write 20 pages is the day you throw 20 pages in the garbage. So there's something about intention that weirdly gets in the way of unfolding, and yet you have to intend not to have an intention. Well, what the frick does that mean? What does it mean to intend not to have an intention? Well, for me, that is intending a space. That's about as you intend to. You said it once, Michael, is very well put. We're intending to have an intention. We're intending to find the intention in here. We're intending to walk into the studio and then it comes forward. Michael, please.
Well, I was going to say for 5 seconds, it's kind of funny that like you sent a couple days later, like, oh, that was such a great insight, and now you're saying the exact opposite.
Yeah.
Which I agree. It's like it's kind of the opposite is also true kind of thing, where it's like both of them, you can hold both.
Well, it's weird because you have to like we're intending to have an intention, right? Like that weird thing of coming into a space, but then the way you do that is by not intending to have an intention or intending to not have an intention. But that's the Hegelian move. The moving into otherness is always in the otherness already, right? Like, because when you say we're intending to have a good conversation, then the reason why I think that gets in the way is because that means you're intending a certain idea of how things are going to go. Like if you say this is going to occur, that probably means there's a framework you want it to meet, which then funny means you introduce the possibility of stress. Like that's what's interesting. I think very often intention in the bad way actually introduces the possibility of stress. Because think about it, like when you say, okay, I'm intending today to write 20 pages. Well, now you have a standard you may not meet. And so then you start to feel stressful. And the funny thing about not intending and yet not intending the unfolding, but intending the space and architecture in which the unfolding can occur, that is a matter of facing fear. That's what's interesting. This kind of, this dialectical passing over into otherness is where you keep it in the realm of facing fear and never let it move into the place where you can encounter stress, right? And actually, like one of the things that I think really does hurt people is like stress. I'm not painting, I'm not writing, I don't have any insights. They move it into stress, and as a result, they have a blockage that occurs, right? But then if you want to avoid stress, you have to keep it in the realm where you can face fear, but that's where you don't know what the metric is. But you're intending to not know what the metric is and to go into the space not knowing what the metric is, trusting that the quality will come forth, right? But that's keeping it in the realm of fear, and fear sucks. And I do think we almost kind of prefer stress to fear because you can kind of make a status out of stress. You can say, I'm stressed. Oh, I'm trying to write 20,000 words and I haven't. Oh, wow, you're trying to write 20,000. Yeah, I know. Like there's something about stress that seems easier to make into a badge and to also feel like you're doing something. I'm stressed, but that means I'm doing something. Oh, I'm useful. There is something about stress that seems ideologically more beneficial than fear, because fear is really hard to bring into stuff. I'm facing fear and I don't know why. Oh, like it's hard to get status from that. Like it's hard to feel like you're doing something. Stress does make you feel like you're doing something. Because what do people spend all the college talking about? Yeah, man, I got 5 tests tomorrow and I got 3 papers and I'm so stressed out and I got a meeting and like stress is a badge. Stress is something like people talk about, right? So stress, that seems to be another characteristic between stress and fear. Stress can be brought into the realm of status and self-importance. Fear can't be. And one of the reasons you feel the fear is precisely because you yourself are like, I could be humiliated in this. People may think it's stupid. People may not see any value in that, but that's what the live event makes possible. It's like, well, it has to be live for quality. Like, where else is quality going to come forth as distinct from quantification than in the live event, right? The only place, well, where else do you face fear but in the live event, right? It doesn't seem really possible to face fear if it's not live because you know the outcome. It's controlled, it's contained. It could be stressful, but it doesn't seem like it could be fearful. And it seems, again, Jesus is always saying, be not afraid, be it like fear. The one who fears is not made perfect in love. Fear seems to be a huge deal in all of this. And but one of the reasons we keep it in the realm of stress, because I'm now thinking the incentives of stress over fear, and then I'll give it to Tyler, is that in stress, there's the possibility of status. There's the possibility of feeling like you're doing something. There's the possibility of having a sense of the metric. And so even if the stress blocks you, well, here's the funny thing. Even if the stress blocks you, you can still feel important. Like, even if you're not doing the thing, the stress can make you feel important. Fear is the space in which flow is possible, but you have to face the fear that you're not doing something of value and that you're not important and that all of this is going to blow up in your face. But if you don't face the fear, the flow that Mr. Jockin was talking about doesn't seem possible. Like, if like on that example was speaking about God and realizing something you never thought about, that's being willing to like face the fear of going into a conversation where you don't know what's going to happen, willing to actually let things come out of you that you don't know may come out of you. And that allows you to then like, well, find out things about yourself I didn't know. And that actually also speaks to why a social coordination system like this is needed, because I think a lot of us need to say a lot more than we realize to hear ourselves say things about ourselves that we didn't know we didn't know. And I think we always underestimate how much of that we need in our lives. Thus the need of something like a story night, thus the need of a social coordination. Like you need yourself to be your own revelation way more than you know. And so, like, the more you enter into that space and you then get a taste of that quality and that surprise, which only seems possible in the live event, the more you can know of that possibility and coordinate your action to more experience that possibility. But all of that requires the facing of fear. And I think unfortunately, because we are emotionally untrained, it is easy to confuse stress with fear and to have the average person confuse stress with fear and think they're facing fear when they're only taking on stress, which actually then following social incentives can get them status and benefit and feel like they're doing something. But it's at the sacrifice of self-forgetfulness and flow. But let me give it to Tyler here. Tyler, please.
Oh, I'm thinking a lot about courage and how that, from like a psychoanalytic standpoint, it's about facing and opening yourself up to the unknown of the other and the unknown of yourself. And but we need language to be able to do that. I'm thinking of just in the last couple days, I guess my relationship with my mom, there's been a block. The relationship wasn't flowing. And I called her and she brought that up, and how much she longs to have that opened. And it's like, oh, at first it's like, well, I'm just going to shut this down because really, in some sense, I'm afraid of her unknown dimension, and I'm afraid that she's gonna not be able to handle mine. But it was kind of amazing how it's actually because of like Freud and the little I know about the uncanny and dosting and ambivalence that really helps to. I was finally able to just say, look, I haven't been open with you about the things that I'm interested in are things like Freud and Marx and these, and I'm afraid that you're going to be scared, like that, you know, that I'm into stuff that's real, you know, too weird for you. And just even saying that, she would, you know, it just opened it up. And then it was so cool how, you know, getting to explain these ideas of the unknown in the other, the uncanny dimension, that which is most unsettling is nestled right in the heart of our fellow human being, and most profoundly in the people that we feel closest to. And so, of course, with our parents, it's going to be like the strongest site, one of the strongest sites of this Das Dingli dimension, which means that we're going to have the most ambivalence there, where we have two contradictory feelings at the same time. And it was just amazing how that actually helped her understand her relationship with her mom so much more. So just, I guess I brought a lot of that up just to say how much, you know, to speak to what Javier was talking about before, that philosophy gives us a language, and that language, you know, in some sense, any given symptom or blockage is the manifestation of a contradiction that hasn't yet been able to find its way into the symbolic, into language. So we're still in the business of naming things. Yeah, and then I love this, you know, intention gets in the way of an unfolding, and intending to not have an intention. One of the things with story night that I have gone round and round with my friend who helps organize it with me. But since I stepped away for several years, I don't feel like I really have the weight to really bring this argument up again. But one of the things is that she likes to put a theme on the night beforehand. And I would prefer that wasn't that way. I would prefer that, okay, let's have some prompts. We could do some prompts, but just even on a technical distinction, and actually I think being a part of this and talking with Andrew has helped me to understand that in some sense, theme is unconscious. It arises without your intention. You recognize it after the fact. But if you're going to not thematize the night, well, then beforehand, then you are opening yourself up to the surprise, where you don't know what's gonna, some things could get real awkward. But even if things get awkward, what that does is it also frees up the possibility of somebody else who wasn't maybe intending, who wasn't thinking that they were going to get up and share, to go, well, you know, the night still held together after that shit. So maybe I could get up and share too. All right. So there's that, you know, that again, like that, if you allow it, the possibility of it to get weird, it kind of also has that, it opens it up for some beautiful things to come into. So anyways, those are just some thoughts.
No, that's magnificent, and I appreciate everyone being here for this Halloween edition. I'm so glad that Mr. Jockin was dressed as an M&M. It was perfect, and yes, the surprise of everyone putting on costumes afterwards. So only possible because Mr. Jockin brought that model, and the social coordination technology allowed that possibility to be afforded. What you were just saying there, Tyler, I think is very powerful. Well, the weird thing is you intend to have a non-intention to allow the unfolding. So you don't intend so that an intention can emerge. It's these weird things, right? And I think basically the only way to make sense of it is as a Leibniz situation or an architecture. And I think basically all of this on being fully human has some sort of situational or architectural structure. So for example, you intend to not have an intention, meaning you don't have a theme, but you also make sure that there are certain constraints in play, that if someone tries to come in drunk, they can't ruin everything, so that they don't ruin the unintention, right? Or you make sure you have the kinds of personalities where that when they come into a space of non-intention, they're all able to, if a unfolding emerges, they can emergently all go that direction without anyone saying it directly, right? So what you have to do that's weird is intend the non-intentional space with certain variables that are present that the organic emergence can occur and the intention can arise, right? That makes no sense unless it's a architectural matter, like it's a situational matter, right? Like contradictions are only addressable into the tension of unfolding as a situational logic. It has to add an extra dimension to it. Like contradictions that self-efface are algebraic. Contradictions that are geometric are situational, ergo process relational movement and maintained. They're mediums instead of mere material. And so, Michael, good to see you. And I'll jump off in a minute as well. But so the issue is, like, when you have the idea, like, you know, great improvisational, like in jazz, great improvisational jazz, they intend to not know what they're going to play, which means that they have the skill to be able to hear when a note is off and not all stop and say, what are you doing? You ruined it. They have the ability to keep going even if something is off, and when they hear a key change, they can jump, and then the not having attention because of the constraints in the architecture and the skill is able to unfold, right? But in the lack of that, having a more direct intention or parameter can actually train people to get to the place where they can do that, right? Like you may actually have to go through years of having a theme or a direct structure to actually, like, of doing like regular music lessons to get to the place where you can do by improvisation. That has to be judged and discerned situation by situation, which means you have to have human relationships and be able to discern things and not know the answers and face fear and stuff. Like all of that right there, there's not a clear metric on when you've succeeded in that, right? So one of the things you say, well, let's just keep it on like the set theme, because then I can just be stressed on what the theme's going to, you create stress. Oh, what's the theme going to be? Are people going to be there, rather than fear, which is we're going to move to the not having a direct theme now, and we're not even going to know if it's going to work, but we think we've come to the place where we can actually make that happen. Stress is only, I think, in a sense, virtuous, if that is proper to say, to the degree it's training wheels to the place of courage. Like if it's training wheels to get to the place of courage, by all means. But the problem is, the years of the training wheels can get you in the habit of using training wheels, and then you never develop the skills to not need them, right? But this is where I think, this is why I do think we need to think more in terms of not, say, leaders, but think more like curators. Not think about experts, but think about designers. You know, if we are in an age of situational logic and geometry and space, then what we need are the designers, are the artists, are the curators, more than the people who know the answers, because that's just keeping us in the realm of stress, per se. We never negate sublate into the realm of courage. So I think that's very powerful, what you were saying. I think also that example you use with your mom, like, there's a meta move there, right? Like, I'm just going to tell you what I feel live in this situation, right? A self-reflexivity. Who would have ever thought that simply just saying how you feel was actually the way to unblock, right? Where would that idea come from? Why would you ever think that? Where does that show up? And yet it is, right? Like, that's an example of a conversational move, if you will, that actually is the secret to relationships. Who knew that certain ways of talking or moves in talking are the secret to a very practical thing of relationship? Like, people say all the time, relationships are about communication. Yes, but what if the relationship is blocked? Then it's not any communication will do. It's particular moves of communication, which I don't mean move in a kind of cunning strategy way. I just simply mean the way is blocked. Oh, well, let's go back and to the side in this way then, right? The moment you say something is blocked, then you're saying that there's a sleeping Snorax and you need to go find the item to get through it. Or you need that let me tell you guys, the craziest Zelda game was Zelda 2 on the NES. Not the first, the second one, where it's like side and it had all these like enemies you never saw in any other game and boulders, and it was dark and creepy. Look, Zelda 2 on the NES, that was crazy, man. And that was a dark, hard game, because in classic video games, they did not play. Oh, it's going to be, no, you will never beat this game. Oh, okay. Never. No, you will not, because you weren't supposed to beat games back then. You were supposed to suffer. Anyway, it's one of those boulders blocking the place you need to go, and you don't have the hammer. And to get the hammer, you have to go through an island maze of many entrances and super villains, and you'll never do it. And to this day, you'll wonder what was beyond that boulder because you couldn't ever get the hammer. Yeah, you didn't have the meta move. You didn't have the right conversational move, right? But who would have ever thought that that's what you do, right? But that reflection, well, because that move you're doing with your mom is kind of like what philosophy does with the world. Something's not flowing, so let's try to really understand it and describe it accurately to see it properly. And maybe if we accurately describe and put into words the world that is, that feels blocked, that somehow will have an unblocking effect. I think like that idea of getting the self-reflexivity to put into words the situation is basically what philosophy is trying to do with reality as a whole so that it flows again, right? And like that ability to also just recognize, well, that's the vulnerability too, right? But you also, like vulnerability is also just something that humans can't just be vulnerable. We act like you can. You either choose to be vulnerable or not. No, vulnerability is like a why. It's a skill. It's something like learning how to talk, how to start. Like a lot of people think being vulnerable is by telling the person how you feel. That often can make things a lot worse. You know, what you want to do is talk about the situation and how you feel relative to the things you're reading in the relationship, not just, I'm really feeling upset at you. Okay. I don't understand the situation, so I don't know what to do with that. But instead, when you say, well, I've not known how to speak with you because I'm reading Freud and Marx, and I think you might find that weird, and so I don't know how to share my interest with you. That is way more powerful and actually seems to point to a truth that is expressing an emotion, but through the description of a situation. So it feels invitational. But that is a skill. That is a different way of thinking, that the word be vulnerable does not necessarily tell you that's what you should do, right? But people act like it does, right? And that's part of the problem. They're locked in algebra. They're not in geometry, so you get in trouble, right? So likewise, people say, seek the beautiful, the true, and the good. What? You know, without philosophy, you have no idea to know what that means. You have no idea to know how to go about that so that these things can flow and be unlocked. But all of that too, I think suggests why language really matters and knowing how to speak really matters. And there's something about speaking that is wedded to the contradiction that the speaking act, which greater and greater philosophy can greater enhance, that is necessary for the flowing of things. And there's something about language that's flowing. And you said it goes back to naming the animals, right? It's all about name. Can you put it into words, right? There's something about philosophy that's trying to put reality into words, trying to figure out how to word it, not because you want to capture it, but because you want to unleash it. That's really important. Language is not merely our effort to understand everything and label it all. No, we're trying to figure out how to put things into words so that it flows on its own, so that it comes to life. Language is not reducing. Language is about finding the words to unlock the flow, not to say, ha, I have a label for everything, right? That's a revelation that comes from psychoanalysis, but I think it's something the great philosophers understood as well. We're trying to put a language to the experience and seeking of beauty, not because we want to capture and control beauty, but because we want to steward the human experience better so that beauty may flow through us and we better be moved by it, right? So it's a certain unlocking. But that brings me to, and I would say all of that, and then I'll close. That brings me, all of what you were saying too is the necessary skills for belonging versus meaning, which goes to what Jockin would like. All of that are the kind of skills that are in the realm of belonging. You can have meaning all day long and never have that skill. So it's really important to get the distinction between meaning and belonging, just like between stress and fear. Like if you find yourself having your language or speak act blocked, which can happen because you go to a church where everyone is of a certain culture or political disposition, and they're like, no, we accept everyone. Yeah, it seems like at this church, if you're not Republican, you're in trouble, right? Like that right there feels like it blocks a speech act, right? Well, that's going to hurt with your belonging. There's something with the ability to speak and the ability to belong that go together. But unfortunately, knowing how to speak is not so easy, thus the need for social coordination. But the reason why that's so interesting to me is because I do think that basically the dream of transhumanism is the idea of the ability of human beings to communicate without words. Wouldn't it be awesome if we just knew each other's thoughts, if we had like a mind reader? What if we didn't have to speak at all? We could just access everyone's heads, right? There's always in history been this kind of dream of what if we could overcome language, right? Like we didn't need words, if we could just in silence communicate, right? Well, if it is the case that language actually unlocks reality and flow, then overcoming language is to overcome the human. And it is precisely because language is messy. Yeah, that's right, Mr. Jog. It's precisely because language is messy. Language is the address of the contradiction of us. So if you remove language, you remove the possibility of addressing the contradiction of us into an unfolding situation of beauty. So that's the extension of humanity in the hyperhuman Carl Smith sense. But you see, in a world that constantly finds itself in a situation where they don't have the words for their emotions, or they don't know what to say to their partner, or they don't have the training and philosophy to feel like they understand the world so it would just flow, one can understand why Neuralink and things like that is such an appealing temptation, because your entire life, all you ever experience is words being a problem. So why would you ever think that you shouldn't solve language and words and get rid of them? Wouldn't we be better off without them? Wouldn't life be so much better if we didn't find ourselves perpetually under the tyranny of words? Well, I think to escape words, to remove words, is to live in a world where it's not possible to have an experience like that with your mom, where it's not possible to have an experience where reality begins to flow and unfold. Because language, precisely in being messy and hard and something that we have to work at, thus is the chisel and tools that makes it possible for the human to chisel out the fullness of the human being that is so hard to bring out, because it's a contradiction that has to be worked through, not solved away. And so language is what we tarry with. And then philosophy being a training and gaining of language, which is a gaining of the ability to see and to let things flow. Then suddenly you go, oh, I don't want to get out of language. I've had experiences where language opens up things. I don't want to escape it. I don't want to go to a world where humans can communicate without speaking any words in silence. That sounds like a world where we would be locked in a contradiction that couldn't unfold into a situation, one that could only go deeper and deeper into a self-effacement, and we wouldn't have the words to even know what we were going for and going through, because we had given up our ability to speak. And so I think spaces of social coordination to train that speaking, to work on that speaking, and to face the fear of speaking is precisely the work required for us to be human. And I think that example of what speaking can do to make a relationship flow and become beautiful again is exactly the modeling that people need to see, as Jockin has emphasized and we've talked about before. That is precisely the modeling that shows people that language can be something that makes us more human and that can expand our horizons versus make us feel like we're always trapped. Because to be human is to ultimately ask the question, am I going to end up enclosed in myself, or am I going to face fear and open up to the other? And I think that's a choice we have to make every day. I loved your example, Tyler, and this has been a treat. Happy Halloween, everyone. Best to you. Thank you. All the best.